The young woman clutched her phone in shock as she heard an utterly absurd request from the other end. Responding to that astonishment was the firm assertion from her grandfather, casually sipping tea, that she must get married immediately. Her face suddenly went blank due to the massive shock that left her mind completely numb. She looked at him doubtfully and asked if he even still recognized his own granddaughter, making the old man instantly fly into a rage to insist he wasn't senile at all. He pulled out an old photo to prove he remembered clearly that she had just turned a beautiful 20. Seeing that he couldn't convince his granddaughter, the old man switched to pretending to be sick and needing someone to take over the company, only to be bluntly exposed by her pointing out his remarkably vigorous morning mountain hiking habit. Ignoring her sharp words, the old man resolutely turned his back and announced that the time for the handover of power had arrived. Drenched in cold sweat, the girl panicked and questioned the reason for this sudden shift when she still wanted to enjoy her free college life. Setting his teacup down firmly on the table, her grandfather pretended to yield by saying he wouldn't force her if she vehemently objected, but in return, she would have to pay a price, which was handing over all her credit cards, leaving her jaw dropped in despair as she watched her lifeline about to vanish. Trembling as she clutched her shoulders, the granddaughter gasped and asked him how he could be so cruel as to drag her beloved credit cards into company matters. She immediately threw a tantrum on the floor, screaming that her grandfather was insanely rich and that this coercion was far too sudden. Getting more worked up as she spoke, she loudly challenged him to go find a new wife and remarry himself instead of forcing a kid barely in her 20s to get married. Ignoring that fierce resistance, her grandfather coldly stood up and announced that he had said his piece, and she was free to think it over as she wished. Seeing him actually about to leave, she hastily pulled a trick to hold him back by clinging tightly to the hem of his jacket and screaming for him to wait a second. Facing that action, the old man merely smiled gently and said he completely understood the reason behind his granddaughter's stubbornness. His compliment about her admission into a prestigious university made her start daydreaming about a brighter scenario. Smugly adopting a haughty air, she declared she would generously consider taking over the company if he stopped forcing her to marry. However, the old man coldly brushed her hand off, sending her tumbling and shattering all illusions of a successful negotiation. He nonchalantly walked away with a threat to freeze all her cards until she changed her mind, leaving his poor granddaughter sobbing in despair. The young woman was stunned when her grandfather suddenly turned back to add a crucial condition that left her paralyzed. With a triumphant smile, the old man raised his finger and announced that if she refused to get married, all other financial support would be cut off entirely. The shock hit its peak, turning her to stone as she heard him add that he had decided to donate his entire massive fortune to charity. Her face paled, her trembling hand reaching her mouth as she thought to herself that this time, her grandfather seemed dead serious. She could only slump onto the floor in utter depression and despair, lamenting that her brilliant life was as good as ruined. It all stemmed from Hanul Group, South Korea's #1 textile empire, which owned an imposing and modern headquarters building. Headed by Chairman Han Du-pai, an entrepreneur of the year who always upheld family traditions throughout his career development. With an ethical management philosophy and active charitable donations, this group had become a national brand that received immense love from the public. And the biggest beneficiary of this success was Chae Eun-ah, the only granddaughter and a massive influencer with a huge follower base. Not only was she gorgeous, but she also proved her sharp mind by recently getting officially accepted into the fashion design program at the prestigious Hankook University. Eun-ah was a glamorous fashion icon on social media, known for her luxury shopping sprees and trend-setting style. From her elegant beauty in a traditional hanbok to her captivating modern charisma, she seemed to possess a flawless, perfect life. Yet behind that spotlight was a harsh reality as she was lying sprawled out with a gaunt face from sheer exhaustion. Her nanny walked in with a stern expression and urged her to quickly get up and pack her bags in preparation for tomorrow's plans. With a final sliver of faint hope, she weakly asked if her grandfather had left any message about calling off the wedding or moving to the new house. But the nanny shattered all illusions by affirming that he hadn't changed his mind at all and scolded her for agreeing too hastily without thinking. She cried tragically on the sofa while her nanny reminded her that she could still back out right now if she wanted to. But the thought of facing a life without her shiny credit cards instantly choked out her will to resist. Hearing that the wedding would be held as a small home ceremony and that she could freely invite her friends, Eun-ah could only wander aimlessly with her soul seemingly having left her body. She quietly packed books into boxes one by one and told herself that this was nothing glorious, so it was best kept an absolute secret from everyone. Eun-ah thoughtfully admitted that she had actually harbored a secret crush on someone for a long time. She quietly took out an old keepsake photo marking happy moments that she had always cherished. Looking at it, memories of her younger self with blushing cheeks and youthful embarrassment suddenly came rushing back. It was a mysterious guy who always wore a black hoodie, the one who had once promised a distant future thousands of days later. Eun-ah stared blankly into space, thinking to herself that if she had opened her heart and considered it back then, perhaps things would be different. Suppressing her pain, she hid the old photo inside a book and turned to question her nanny about the reason for keeping the groom's identity a secret. But the response was only a meaningful silence and the somber gaze of the nanny who had always loved her dearly. The young woman grimaced in frustration as she pressed her on why she wouldn't even reveal her fiancé's name. The nanny just giggled and recalled the chairman's words that if she found out early, she would cause trouble, so the nanny completely agreed with this decision. Despite her knowing smile, Eun-ah firmly declared that if he turned out to be a creep, she would call off the wedding instantly. Eun-ah remained seated dazedly beside the packed boxes, her mind still lingering on unsaid words. Seeing this, the nanny folded clothes while comforting her that the chairman had surely chosen a wonderful grandson-in-law far beyond her expectations. She offered a mysterious smile and nonchalantly left open the question of who could ever predict what lies ahead. A faint glimmer of hope suddenly flashed in the young girl's head about a fateful, romantic encounter straight out of a fairy tale. But practicality quickly pulled her back to reality, making her ask in a panic whether her future husband was an ugly guy. Witnessing her over-anxious worry, the nanny merely remained silent with a knowing look, well aware that the guy was exactly her type. 2 weeks passed quickly, and the traditional ancient house was grandly decorated in preparation for an upcoming major event. In her vibrant wedding gown, Eun-ah nervously clutched her phone as she saw unexpected news pop up on the screen. Her hands began to tremble violently, her breathing heavy as the actual images started striking her eyes. Her face turned pale, and she screamed in outrage that she had been blatantly tricked on the most important day of her life. Eun-ah's blood boiled when she received a teasing text from her cousin, accompanied by a picture of an incredibly dorky-looking guy in glasses standing next to her grandfather. She fell stunned into silence as she felt the tense atmosphere wrapping around the entire room. While Eun-ah held her breath and peeked stealthily through the door crack, the crowd outside was still feverishly searching for the missing bride. The wedding ceremony was already 30 minutes late, making her panic even more as she realized she was backing herself into a corner. Small and filled with resentment, she told herself she had to escape from here fast before getting caught, cursing her cousin's infuriating silence. Outside the ceremony hall, the air grew buzzing amidst a sea of flowers and shimmering lights, while the main star had yet to show her face. A phone suddenly buzzed repeatedly in a guest's hand, signaling urgent messages from the runaway bride. Ju Jiang calmly smoothed her stylish purple hair, her sharp eyes scanning the phone screen before nonchalantly walking toward the crowd. Standing before the grandparents and the bewildered groom, she loudly suggested that everyone consider calling off the wedding right now. Since the bride had already run off, the ceremony needed to be postponed, and while at it, she also advised him to rethink handing over the company's future. The groom gave a slight smirk and firmly declared that he would personally go find the stubborn bride hiding somewhere. Those decisive words stunned Ju Jiang, her eyes showing clear surprise mixed with speechless confusion. She showed an annoyed attitude and questioned herself who he thought he was to dare brazenly interrupt her like that. But then the shocking truth came to light. The guy wearing the bow tie was actually just a secretarial assistant attending a wedding for the first time despite being 27. Bright sunlight bathed the traditional ancient house, where an incredibly dramatic search was about to unfold. Eun-ah clicked her tongue in frustration, looking up at the ancient ceiling, finding it incredibly annoying that the crowd outside still refused to give up. She stealthily observed the situation through the door crack and quietly wondered why they were still persistently hunting for her after being 30 minutes late. Suddenly, a dark shadow loomed over her, accompanied by men's shoes appearing right beside her, terrifying her with the thought of getting caught right then and there. Pushing aside all fear, she resolved to make a living on her own through social media ads instead of depending on those cards. Cowering behind the door while massaging her sore feet, she nervously bit her lip, wondering why her cousin still wouldn't pick up the phone. Eun-ah hurriedly grabbed the train of her wedding dress, telling herself she had to quickly escape this ancient mansion before it was too late. However, a sudden tug threw her off balance, leaving her only able to let out a helpless groan. She grimaced in pain and looked back, silently cursing her troublesome wedding dress train that seemed to have snagged on something. In front of her eyes right now was a pair of polished black men's shoes nonchalantly stepping firmly on her vibrant pink dress train, rendering her unable to budge. Eun-ah stared upward in shock and instantly recognized a horrifying truth slowly coming into focus through the haze. The mysterious man nonchalantly pressed the phone to his ear, informing the caller on the other end that he had found the bride like a dream. He offered a subtle, knowing smile, gently reassuring the caller to rest easy as everything was now under control. With sharp, piercing eyes, he boldly declared that he would personally escort this stubborn bride back to the altar immediately. Sitting flat on the floor in deep resentment, Eun-ah furiously wondered why this annoying man dared to blatantly show up right in front of her. Looking at his sturdy back, she was quietly stunned to realize that her old acquaintance from years ago was now incredibly tall and overwhelmingly imposing. Chae Eun-ah shivered slightly as she felt the strange warmth from the large hand tightly gripping hers. She was stunned to realize that even the man's voice had become deep and completely different from before. Amidst her chaotic and senseless thoughts, painful memories from the past suddenly rushed back powerfully into her mind. The snowy night that blanketed the ancient tile roofs white back then suddenly came back vividly, like a sad movie. She remembered her desperate self trying to reach out, only to receive a cold voicemail message from the other end. Her hand had trembled back then, clutching a rushed note, the only thing left behind after an unannounced farewell. The written words about studying abroad and a brief wish to take care had become an emotional scar haunting her for years. In the lonely darkness, the call of her name kept echoing remorsefully, like a lingering reminder of the person who had departed. Eun-ah widened her eyes in shock, looking straight at the man before her, silently praying that this reality was not a dream. Beneath the shower of brilliant cherry blossoms, the young man gently lifted the bride's chin, officially bringing an end to her years of agonizing waiting. The groom leaned close to the bride's ear, suggesting in a deep voice that they quickly get this over with, making Eun-ah shocked and ask back what he actually wanted to do right now. Seeing that stunned expression, the officiant just laughed it off, assuming the bride was too nervous before the big moment, then suddenly asked the two to exchange a kiss as a sacred symbol of love and bond. She froze with a dumbfounded face, completely unable to believe the ironically funny situation unfolding. Meanwhile, down below, the nanny was fiercely scolding the younger female cousin for messing up the ceremony script, turning everything upside down. However, the groom casually whispered that this wasn't their first time, so there was no need to worry too much. He smirked arrogantly and declared he would improvise to quickly end this charade. At that moment, Eun-ah's mind suddenly went blank as a distant memory abruptly flashed back. Her eyes welled up with emotion upon realizing that after so many years of weary waiting, that person had finally returned. Clenching her fists in emotion, she thought to herself that this fateful kiss was exactly what she had been desperately waiting for so long. Right then, the handsome groom gently leaned in closer and reminded the bride to at least close her eyes to embrace this moment. Contrary to the romance, Eun-ah unexpectedly threw a powerful punch straight into his face right in front of everyone. The sudden act of violence left all the guests and her grandfather completely frozen, their jaws dropping in astonishment at the massive shock. With her cheeks flushed red from anger, she gritted her teeth and yelled, calling him a despicable bastard before running away. Time passed, and the night gradually enveloped the quiet apartment complex as the wall clock ticked past 10:10 in the evening. The living room sank into absolute silence, as if all the aftershocks of the chaotic morning wedding had completely settled down. The sound of the door lock echoed, shattering the silent atmosphere, signaling that the owner of the house had finally returned safely. The young man casually pressed the phone to his ear, softly reassuring the person on the other end that it was fortunate he had made it home. Inside, Eun-ah sat quietly with her back turned, full of emotion, then softly stated that she was also home right now. The young man softly promised to call back later, his deep eyes hiding a terrifyingly calm demeanor. That sharp gaze silently observed every small reaction from the girl, as if trying to understand her tangled thoughts. He casually asked if she was feeling hungry while Eun-ah just pouted in resentment. His hands arranged his personal belongings as he suggested they both clean up before going to eat because he had already finished talking with her grandfather. Her anger flared up, and the young woman snapped, questioning what on earth he was thinking to act as if nothing had happened. She bitterly brought up his sudden appearance after years of going missing without a single satisfactory explanation. Eun-ah bitterly asked why he could act as naturally as old friends while she was struggling with a messy jumble of emotions. She stated with disdain that he was surely the only one feeling comfortable in this suffocating room. Eun-ah choked up, turned away, and dropped a sarcastic remark because he had never had to taste the feeling of being abandoned. The only response was the young man's thoughtful silence as the wall clock quietly ticked closer to late night. Eun-ah slightly closed her eyes, bitterly admitting that what he just said was not wrong at all. Meanwhile, the young man still sat coldly by the desk, casually challenging her to scold or vent her anger on him to her heart's content. Lying flat on the cold floor, she painfully asked herself if it was worth it to keep wallowing in a fleeting relationship of less than a year. Reaching the peak of her anger, Eun-ah's trembling hands grabbed a thick book on the shelf, as if to find an anchor for her fury. She used all her strength to throw it hard at that hateful back, choking out a question about why he dared to treat her so cruelly. The room suddenly became chaotic with things flying everywhere. She screamed bitterly that he was the one who told her to hit him. The young man hastily raised his hands in a gesture, trying to calm her down to demand that they clarify a single truth about their situation. Tears falling down her beautiful face, Eun-ah choked up and asked since when had their deep affection been considered a temporary fling. The image of two kids growing up together returned as a reminder of the 17 years of close bond they had sacrificed family ties to protect. In response to that interrogation was the angular, masculine face of the man remaining terrifyingly silent, seemingly hiding an unspeakable sorrow. Eun-ah stared blankly into space, wondering to herself if the man in front of her was still the brother figure who once wholeheartedly protected her years ago. Answering that doubt was the young man's cold gaze as he casually admitted that her accusations were completely correct. He calmly sat in front of the computer and declared he truly didn't care. No matter how she scolded or vented, an apology would be meaningless now. Lying flat on the floor feeling completely exhausted, she tormented herself for still being the only one sinking deep into this relationship of less than a year. Eun-ah's trembling hands grabbed a thick book on the shelf, silently mocking that this man truly had too many words that could drive someone crazy. She gripped the object tightly in her hand and then screamed in rage, questioning the reason why he dared to treat her with such an arrogant attitude. Eun-ah immediately unleashed a barrage of thrown books at him, making him cover his head to dodge and beg her to calm down and talk. The young man suddenly put on a serious face, gesturing to stop, demanding that both of them truly clarify the nature of their current relationship right away. Tears falling profusely down her flushed cheeks, she choked out a question about since when their close affection had been cheapened by him as a fleeting fling. Because they had spent 17 years of their youth growing up together, even sacrificing family ties just to protect this bond. Eun-ah stared blankly at her phone, then suddenly spoke up to change the subject, breaking the silent atmosphere. She hesitantly brought up a hypothetical scenario about what to do if one day she accidentally bumped into or got contacted by an ex. The friend sitting opposite immediately drilled into the suspicion, bluntly asking if that guy named Ju Ha-jin had proactively sought her out. Eun-ah jumped in surprise, sweating bullets as the spot-on question made her face change color in complete awkwardness. She hastily waved her hands to clarify that she was just talking about a hypothetical situation and that Ju Hajin hadn't actually reached out. Looking panicked on the bed, Eun-ah tried hard to explain that she was only curious about how to handle things if they unfortunately got tangled up again. Her friend slightly bowed her head in thought, seemingly quietly observing the insecurity clearly showing in every gesture of the small girl, then suddenly dropped a bombshell by asking straight to the point whether deep down in her heart, Eun-ah still had feelings for that man. Eun-ah shouted in fierce objection, trying her best to assert that she had absolutely no lingering feelings left for that painful past. But her hand unconsciously gripped the hem of her shirt, softly making excuses that feeling bothered when mentioning an ex is a completely normal reaction. The girl's eyes wavered slightly as she sank into a vague stream of thoughts about the difficult, haunting choices ahead. She restlessly brought her hand to her mouth and asserted that if it were her, she would absolutely stay away from that man to avoid getting into trouble. The friend sitting on the bed widened her eyes in astonishment, hurriedly asking again if she was truly serious about this resolute decision. Looking into the void, she explained that every breakup happens for a reason, and meeting again right now couldn't salvage anything. The scene suddenly shifted to a quiet corner of a bathroom, where steam began to cover everything in a hazy blur as if hiding an intimate secret. The freezing stream of water splashed down on bare feet upon the tiled floor, evoking the feeling of a gloomy preparation for the impending future. The man's muscular back appeared with crisscrossing scars, a silent reminder that people can change to an unrecognizable extent. At the prestigious Hankook University campus, the main building stood tall, signaling the start of a new day with a bustling pace of life. The girl restlessly bit her lip as she stared at the phone in her hand, secretly fearing a bad omen that was gradually manifesting. Answering that insecurity was the scrutinizing look from the friend walking with her, who pressed for a reason and scolded her for acting incredibly weird. Eun-ah looked restlessly at her phone, blaming herself for being contradictory when she both didn't want him to call back and felt anxious when he remained silent. She and her friend strolled in front of the large building, dodging the question about whether her grandfather had actually cut off her financial support yet. The friend beside her advised her to stop her pointless worrying to focus on enjoying the vibrant college life she used to be excited about. Eun-ah instantly regained her spirit. She confidently asserted she would cast her worries away to live for herself despite any troubles. She told herself she would protect her hard-earned academic achievements at all costs and wouldn't let him disrupt her new life, but then paused at her friend's attitude. The two girls were bewildered among the crowd of students upon feeling a weird atmosphere and scrutinizing stares surrounding them. The truth was quickly revealed through a phone screen with countless posts on the school forum eagerly confirming Eun-ah's presence. She grimaced in regret because her habit of posting online had attracted too much unnecessary attention throughout the entire class. With her optimistic nature, she smugly considered this to be the life of a superstar, causing her friend to just shake her head in frustration and demand to sit somewhere else. Suddenly, a stranger's hand lightly tapped on the table accompanied by a hesitant call, dissipating all the joking and making her turn around in surprise. The unfamiliar young man with romantic curly hair unexpectedly approached to say hello, making the two girls slightly taken aback. He scratched his head in awkwardness and introduced himself as Kim Ji-dong, his handsome face suddenly turning flush red from shyness. Ji-dong revealed he was also a design major student and had seen Eun-ah since the opening ceremony, although she had no impression of him whatsoever. Hearing the invitation to eat with the seniors, Eun-ah excitedly imagined rosy get-togethers between seniors and juniors. She immediately turned to drag Jaewon along because she didn't want to miss the chance to be treated to a meal by the upperclassmen. Jaewon looked at her with a profound gaze. She seemed to be quietly observing the reaction of the newly appeared young man. Kim Ji-dong smiled slightly and agreed to go with the whole group, even though that smile still carried a hint of embarrassment at being put in a surprising situation. However, the plan suddenly fell apart when someone announced they were busy with unexpected matters, causing the lunch date to be put on hold in regret. Striding beside him, Eun-ah worriedly asked if everyone in the cafeteria would recognize her true identity. Answering that insecurity was Ji-dong's firm affirmation as he looked deep into her eyes and declared that Eun-ah was the most beautiful person he had ever met. Eun-ah forced a smile to thank Ji-dong, but in her heart, She secretly complained that the atmosphere when it was just the two of them was truly too awkward. She continuously waved her hands to fiercely decline when her newly acquainted friend kept insisting on giving up his jacket and carrying her bag for her. Just as the awkwardness reached its peak, a rapid buzzing coming from her phone suddenly became a timely savior. With a radiant face, as if she had just escaped a disaster, Eun-ah hurriedly asked for permission to pause the conversation to pick up the phone. She casually greeted the other end of the line, completely unaware that Ji-dong was watching her from behind with a thoroughly bewildered face. However, the smile on her lips suddenly froze upon hearing a deep male voice on the other end coldly asking where she was. Eun-ah's expression changed. She frowned in full alert and demanded to know who on earth this stranger was to have her number. Answering that harshness was Hajin's arrogant smirk as he casually reproached her for deleting his number and claimed to be feeling hurt. She instantly turned to stone with a look of disgust clearly showing on her face, silently cursing that she had just run into a crazy man. Unable to stay calm any longer, Eun-ah flew into a rage and yelled into the phone, questioning who exactly he thought he was to dare make such flippant remarks. Hajin smirked triumphantly, announcing over the phone that he had finally found his target, leaving Eun-ah frozen because he abruptly hung up, making Ji-dong worriedly ask if it was a prank call. She angrily let out a curse while her male schoolmate tried hard to stop her, without realizing the figure of her nominal husband looming right behind her. Observing, Hajin's eyes narrowed, full of annoyance and possessiveness upon seeing his wife standing next to a strange man. He let out a heavy sigh, as if his final shred of patience had reached its limit, then unexpectedly pulled a stunt by loudly yelling, "Wifey," in the middle of the crowd, making everyone around jump in surprise and turn to look. The resounding call made Eun-ah's mind reel, turning her entire world upside down in just a split second. She slowly turned her head with a pale face, praying to herself that the sound just now was merely her mishearing. But the harsh truth appeared right before her eyes, making her just stand rooted to the spot with a speechless and thoroughly exasperated expression. Meanwhile, Hajin flashed a radiant smile and casually waved hello as if wanting to publicly declare his ownership in front of everyone. Eun-ah silently cursed in her heart that this man must have completely lost his mind to dare cause a scene right at the university. While Ji-dong was still in shock, naively asking again whether that strange man had just called out to her directly. The atmosphere suddenly became tense as the three stood facing each other in the middle of the campus, creating a pressure-filled silence. Hajin's eyes darkened, clearly showing irritation and impatience at having to witness such an eyesore right in front of him. The moment he saw Ji-dong's hand gripping Eun-ah's arm to protect her, the rage inside his heart seemed ready to explode. Hajin coldly raised his hand, pointing straight at the touching hand with an incredibly fierce and threatening attitude. He smirked and made a gunpowder-laced suggestion, demanding the college student to quickly remove his hand so the conversation could go more smoothly. The direct warning left Ji-dong dumbfounded. The guy could only stammer a question in bewilderment because he hadn't yet understood what was going on. Hajin suddenly changed his attitude. He flashed a radiant, highly fake smile, and asserted that he had spoken very loudly, so both of them had definitely heard it crystal clear. He casually covered his mouth with his hand and continued to call out, "Wifey," in a sweet but equally provocative way, making Eun-ah want to just explode on the spot. Eun-ah threw a lightning-fast mouth-covering move to stop Hajin, hastily explaining to Ji-dong that this was just an old friend, and they needed to leave right away. Without waiting for anyone to react, she used her swift escape tactics, dragging him out of sight along with a highly forced promise to grab lunch with her friend. Ji-dong fell into a petrified state in the middle of the crowd, only able to stand silently in the suffocating atmosphere as he watched the young couple disappear. The scene shifted to a modern apartment building, where the yellow lights began to turn on, signaling a fiery confrontation. As soon as she stepped into the house, Eun-ah unleashed her lioness roar, screaming and asking Hajin if he was completely crazy for causing a scene at school. She furiously declared that if rumors broke out, her beautiful college life would completely go up in smoke because of his selfishness. Hajin maintained an unbothered attitude, casually holding a glass of water and explaining that he knew full well she would never answer the phone or reply to texts. With a profound look, he asserted that if he hadn't taken action, she would have definitely chosen to hide forever instead of returning to this house. Eun-ah, boiling with raging fury, gripped her water glass tightly and demanded to know if that was why he went out of his way to stalk her all the way to school. Contrary to that harshness, Hajin coldly delivered a critical blow, declaring he wasn't stalking her at all because that university was also where he was studying. Eun-ah did a rainbow spit take in extreme shock upon hearing the devastating news that left the whole room drowning in astonishment. While coughing violently, she pressed to know when he had enrolled, only to receive the casual reply that he had been accepted right after submitting his application. The vision of a brilliant college life suddenly vanished into thin air, making her hold her head and scream because she didn't want to run into him at school. While her mind was in a mess, Hajin casually pulled a document handover move and demanded she quickly take it. Eun-ah was shocked to realize it was a marriage registration form, while he added another critical blow that her grandfather would cut off all her credit cards if they didn't submit it this week. The name Ju Hajin sitting prominently in the husband section on the black and white paper felt like a fateful death sentence stamped onto her future. Eun-ah's cheeks suddenly flushed red with embarrassment. She awkwardly looked down at the form while indescribably chaotic emotions surged in her heart. Answering that awkwardness was Hajin's deep and unwavering gaze, as if he was secretly observing her every little reaction. Tremblingly flipping to the back of the paper in suspicion, she stammered, asking what on earth the dense lines of text written on the back were. Hajin coldly executed a boundary-setting move, declaring that those were the cohabitation rules they both had to follow from now on. Eun-ah repeated the phrase, cohabitation rules, with a highly skeptical face as she looked at the bizarre clauses appearing before her eyes. Hajin casually explained the division of chores and privacy, despite her begging for them to live separately to bypass her grandfather's surveillance. He instantly extinguished that hope by warning that her grandfather would send people for surprise inspections, leaving her clicking her tongue in deep dissatisfaction at being cornered. Eun-ah sarcastically admitted that this man had truly prepared incredibly well for this inescapable marriage charade. She drilled into the suspicion that he only agreed to marry someone he had absolutely no feelings for because he was too desperate for power at the company. Right at that moment, a powerful counter-question rang out, shattering the suffocating atmosphere and leaving her suddenly stunned. Eun-ah stammered a question back in extreme bewilderment at the unusually serious expression of the man opposite her. Hajin suddenly lowered his voice and demanded to know who dared to claim that his heart held absolutely no affection for her. His eyes turned razor-sharp and held a fierce sincerity, directly piercing deep into her mind like a declaration of ownership. Facing that intensity, she gasped out a flustered sigh, completely frozen by the overly sudden emotional attack. Eun-ah looked at Hajin full of doubt, thinking to herself that he must be looking down on her, and coldly asked if he truly believed she would be moved by those words right now. Answering that harshness was Hajin's arrogant smirk as he delivered a psychological blow, reminding her that she was the one who said an 8-month relationship was no big deal. He decisively stood up and declared that if that was the case, negotiating this marriage should have been incredibly easy and smooth. While Eun-ah was still in shock, Hajin affirmed she would get the freedom and finances from her grandfather just as she wanted. His eyes suddenly turned cold and full of ambition as he emphasized that he too would achieve what he had been promised. Hajin flashed a meaningful smile and threw back a question, asking if everything hadn't finally become incredibly simple after all. Eun-ah stood completely frozen with a dumbfounded face, her mind suddenly swept into an endless void by the attitude of the man in front of her. Amidst the confusion, an old memory suddenly came alive from when they were sitting together, where Hajin made a promising move that nothing would ever change between them. The image of him from years ago looking at her with unwavering determination, affirming that no matter what she chose, he would always be by her side to protect her, appeared like a sad movie scene. He smiled, faintly looking at the little girl of his past, repeating the question about simplicity like a finishing blow, reminding her of a fateful vow that remained intact. Eun-ah's hands tightly gripped the hem of her shirt, trying to suppress her surging emotions in the face of Hajin's calculating words. Unable to bear it any longer, she suddenly pulled a move by standing up abruptly and screaming her acceptance of all conditions to end this suffocating conversation. She pointed her finger straight at his chest, furiously declaring that she had no reason to care about an ex-boyfriend who had gone missing for the past 3 years. With a smug yet bitter face, Eun-ah told herself that just being able to spend money freely and live a luxurious life was more than enough for this trade-off. Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Hajin gave a faint, mysterious smile and sarcastically remarked that he felt extremely grateful for how smoothly things were going. He casually extended his hand forward, demanding an official handshake to confirm this marriage contract filled with schemes. Eun-ah stared at that hand with eyes full of resentment, knowing full well she was stepping into a gamble with no way back. She slowly reached out her hand in response, but accompanied it with an ironclad warning, demanding he absolutely never interfere in her college life. The moment their hands touched was also when a fateful pact officially began, binding two individuals full of secrets together. However, Eun-ah suddenly flinched and gasped in astonishment when she felt an unexpected pull from him, catching her completely off guard. Hajin unexpectedly unleashed a hard pull on her hand, making Eun-ah lose her balance and tumble forward in absolute bewilderment. He leaned close to her, asking in a deep voice whether she truly understood the price she had to pay when signing this pact. With her face flushed red from embarrassment, she tried to act feisty, demanding to know what on earth he was implying with those shady words. Eun-ah struggled with all her might to escape his tight grip, gritting her teeth and demanding the man in front of her let go immediately. Answering that resistance was Hajin's sturdy back as he coldly declared that as long as he felt displeased, her life would never know peace again. He pressed his face close to the small girl's and asked if he actually took action, who would be the one to taste the most extreme suffering. Flashing a meaningful smile, Hajin casually declared that from now on he would entirely entrust himself to her care and management. Eun-ah froze with a dumbfounded face like she'd been petrified upon hearing the sweet call of wifey coming from his mouth for the very first time. Time passed, and the next morning Hajin appeared at her bedroom door with a heavy scowl, annoyedly interrogating her if she knew how many times he had to patiently knock. In the middle of the modern apartment building, the harsh cohabitation rules began to be established alongside her regretful screams for having accidentally overslept. While hurriedly putting on her socks, Eun-ah sulkily fired off complaints at Hajin, saying he should have tried to wake her up much more aggressively. But Hajin just casually crossed his arms and launched a counterattack, stating that if she had spent that time learning self-discipline, she would already be at school by now. She pouted, turning back to ask if waking her up was really that difficult, considering she was always used to being taken care of by her nanny. With a highly suspicious face, Eun-ah threw out a challenge, asking if he was plotting to have them hold hands and go to school together. Answering that suspicion was only the man's mysterious smirk, causing her heart to suddenly skip a beat unconsciously. However, Hajin instantly crushed all her fantasies by holding up a pitch-black trash bag along with a brutally blunt affirmation that such a thing would never happen. Following the rule of splitting chores equally, the guy flashed a smug smile as he handed her the trash bag and reminded her not to forget this important duty. Eun-ah angrily grabbed the trash bag, walking and muttering complaints about why this pile of trash always appeared exactly when she was in the biggest rush. Just as she stepped out the door, she didn't forget to look back in full alert to ask what other bizarre tricks he hadn't unleashed yet. Hajin smiled brightly and delivered the finishing blow with the third rule, demanding she text a report if she was going to be late and absolutely not be late for any other appointments during the week. Eun-ah furiously yelled that limiting her drinking nights was never in the cohabitation rules they had agreed upon. Answering that anger was Hajin's sinister smile as he casually used her grandfather to threaten her, backing her into a corner. Hajin smirked triumphantly as he personally added a permission clause to the third rule, making Eun-ah furious at his dictatorship. Obeying the rule of not throwing things, she could only suppress her rage by tightly squeezing the trash bag in her hand until it deformed. Eun-ah sulkily stepped out of the house, not forgetting to drop a scolding remark that this man was truly too much of a nuisance. Right as she was about to leave, Hajin dealt another reminder about the fifth rule: absolutely no interfering in each other's school lives. He flashed a meaningful smile, seemingly thoroughly enjoying teasing and controlling every action of his nominal wife. Eun-ah's eyes widened in sheer resentment, silently cursing in her heart that she was truly going crazy because of his presence. The scene shifted to the Hankook University campus, where the bustling pace of life began to signal the troubles ahead. Eun-ah anxiously darted her eyes around, silently recalling the highly mysterious final rule like a bad omen for the future. Eun-ah told herself she had to handle outside relationships tactfully to avoid misunderstandings in accordance with the cohabitation rules, while Ji-dong stood opposite her with a flushed face full of embarrassment. She hastily threw out an excuse, asserting that the intimate call just now was actually just a mischievous prank by a close friend who loved to mess around. Seeing the other's dejected expression, Eun-ah smiled brightly and explained that she had gone out of her way to look for him everywhere to clarify the situation but couldn't find a trace of him. Ji-dong put on a serious face and reminded her not to hang around such men, because those words truly made his heart feel incredibly insecure and were prone to cause misunderstandings. He slightly raised an eyebrow and made an offer to let this slide if Eun-ah agreed to grab a meal with him, leaving her momentarily stunned by the relentless attack. With her mischievous nature, she immediately played dumb by asking back if this was an intimate meal invitation between a senior and a junior to lighten the mood. Ji-dong could only sigh in sheer helplessness. He casually delivered the deciding blow by holding out his phone with the screen already unlocked toward Eun-ah amidst her bewilderment. He stated in a deep voice that he really needed her actual phone number so they could contact each other properly instead of having to search for each other hopelessly. When Eun-ah hesitantly suggested just communicating via social media messages, Ji-dong's overwhelmingly disappointed face showed he would absolutely not accept that temporary fix. Finally, the guy flashed a smile as radiant as the sun again, happily waving goodbye along with a firm promise that he would call her back as soon as possible. Eun-ah received a thoroughly surprised look from her friend group as they pressed to know if it was true that she had actually given her phone number to Ji-dong. While walking down the stairs, she silently complained that it was the only way to escape and promised herself to only reply to his messages politely to avoid giving him any more hope. However, her pink-haired friend astutely noticed Eun-ah's indifferent attitude, immediately throwing a psychological punch by asserting that Ji-dong was definitely not her ideal type. Eun-ah instantly changed her expression. She stammered to explain that it wasn't because he wasn't her type, but simply because she had an incredibly unspeakable reason to refuse. Her awkwardness made her friends even more curious. They all turned to look at her with scrutinizing eyes, as if wanting to uncover the truth behind her vague answer. Her best friend dealt another critical blow by bringing up Eun-ah's previous bold declaration about how she always craved having a protective boyfriend. In a panic, she deployed a cover-up tactic by claiming she had changed her mind, while the conscience of a married woman kept screaming at her. Her friend's sharp and highly suspicious gaze seemed to pierce right through the perfect facade Eun-ah was trying to build to hide her marriage secret. Ignoring that bewilderment, her friend group still enthusiastically dragged her along and pressed to know if Eun-ah would join the whole gang for a drinking gathering after class. Right at this moment, the warning of her nominal husband suddenly flashed back, making her face change color. She could only try to find a way to decline the invitation to avoid violating the cohabitation rules. Her close friends started to get suspicious upon noticing that Eun-ah had suddenly become unexpectedly good and docile lately and no longer cared for all-night parties. She sweated bullets when teased about following a curfew even more strictly than in high school, causing the secret of her nominal husband to almost be exposed. Eun-ah looked thoughtfully at the phone in her hand, silently mapping out a plan so she could fully enjoy a free evening with her friends. She decided to unleash the classic lie move via text, informing Hajin that she had to stay at school working on a project until late at night before coming home. With the highly optimistic thought that the worst couldn't possibly happen, Eun-ah casually joined the party, without realizing that disaster was steadily approaching. Meanwhile, Hajin suddenly appeared with a meaningful smile, as if he had already caught onto every clumsy move of his little wife right at the bar. The chibi versions of the two appeared in a hilarious way, reflecting the contrast between his calm demeanor and the extreme panic surging within her. The bar's atmosphere was filled with boisterous cheers and the inviting sound of foamy beer mugs, overshadowing Eun-ah's last shred of vigilance. Just as the fun was reaching its climax, Hajin loomed toward their table like an uninvited guest, interrupting every conversation. Eun-ah completely turned to stone with a pale face, stammering to ask why the man who was supposed to be at home right now suddenly showed up right in front of her. Her friend Park Ji-won widened her eyes in astonishment, continuously pressing Hajin to know since when exactly he had returned to South Korea. Answering that shock was Hajin's rugged smile as he casually confirmed it and dropped a greeting after years of going missing. With a smug chibi face, the guy expressed his amusement at accidentally bumping into so many old acquaintances, leaving Eun-ah only able to sit still in high alert. The atmosphere was suddenly broken by a brown-haired guy running over to call Hajin's name, intending to report that he had finished talking with the bar owner. However, he immediately executed a bewildered freeze-frame move upon recognizing the special figures sitting at the same table as his friend. This friend cheered in pure excitement upon recognizing Ji-won, making the pink-haired girl happily raise her hand to wave back naturally. He couldn't hide his enthusiasm, continuously marveling at the bizarre fate that allowed them to have such a full reunion since graduation day. The surprise reached its peak when he discovered that Chae Eun-ah was also present, startling her so much that she could only use her water glass to hide her awkwardness. In a cute chibi form, the friend expressed his awe, confirming that this was indeed the famous Eun-ah, who was known as Hajin's ex-girlfriend. Hajin gave a profound little smirk. He casually seized the opportunity by suggesting that since everyone had accidentally bumped into each other this way, Hajin smirked arrogantly and then casually made an approach move, dropping a request to join the table with Eun-ah's friend group, making the atmosphere suddenly stall. The table suddenly became filled with all sorts of delicious dishes and cold beer, but it seemed no one had the mind to truly enjoy their taste anymore. Eun-ah quietly sipped her beer and let out a thoroughly helpless sigh, silently lamenting her ironic fate at this moment. She felt like she was sitting on hot coals, surrounded by both her new friend group and the old ones who knew every nook and cranny of her past. A friend in the group immediately drilled into the suspicion, pressing to know if Hajin had actually decided to return to South Korea to settle down. Hajin casually dropped a confirming blow that he was planning to enroll at this very school, making Eun-ah unable to stop shivering at the impending prospect. The friend group continued to pile on words of reproach about his sudden disappearance back then and demanded he absolutely stay in proper contact from now on. He flashed a rugged smile and tactfully apologized for his hastiness in the past, while expressing his desire to hang out with everyone more often in the near future. However, the pink-haired friend's eyes suddenly sharpened upon discovering a highly questionable sparkling gleam resting on Hajin's hand. Unable to contain her curiosity, she blurted out a question about whether the ring on his ring finger was proof of a secret romantic relationship. Hajin casually gave a vague admission about the existence of a secret relationship, plunging the whole friend group into sheer curiosity. Eun-ah's hands suddenly paused midair, her heart seeming to skip a beat at the other's highly ambiguous answer. She hastily used a tissue to wipe her hands to hide her surging panic, trying to maintain a calm facade under the scrutinizing eyes around her. While pretending to sip her beer, Eun-ah silently screamed and questioned why this man dared to casually wear his wedding ring while out partying like this. Answering that silence was Hajin's sinister smile as he casually asked if it was okay for someone who was already taken to show up at this bar. Eun-ah immediately did a rainbow spit take upon hearing him assert that his wife was busy working on a project, so she would never discover his whereabouts. Park Ji-won clicked her tongue in disdain, not hesitating to throw out a sarcastic remark about the extreme callousness of the man famously known for being cold. Meanwhile, Eun-ah sulkily wiped her mouth and told herself she had to stay strong so her identity as his legal wife wouldn't be exposed right now. The atmosphere suddenly shifted when the friend accompanying him spoke up to correct them, saying Hajin was actually only here to attend an interview for a part-time job, making the friend opposite them widen her eyes in shock, pressing to know if someone like him was truly planning to start working in this chaotic place. Eun-ah narrowed her eyes in deep suspicion upon hearing Hajin casually admit to something shady right in front of her close friends. Ji-won immediately pulled a scrutinizing move, recognizing that the Carrere ring on his hand was from a luxury wedding band line famous among the upper class. Hajin smirked triumphantly, casually bragging that his secret lover was actually a tycoon possessing a massive fortune. Fearing her marriage secret would be exposed, Eun-ah instantly unleashed a silencing strike by forcing him to down his glass of alcohol immediately. She suddenly transformed into a chibi god of alcohol, frantically filling everyone's glasses and beginning an uncontrollable rampage of partying. In her drunken state, Eun-ah screamed, demanding to raise a glass to celebrate old memories, making the bar's atmosphere bizarrely boisterous. Her close friends could only stand frozen watching her, constantly whispering and gossiping about her overly sudden change in temperament lately. Despite their attempts to stop her, Eun-ah continued to deploy her drinking-like-water skills, completely drowning herself in alcohol to forget reality. The intoxication reached its peak, making her shut down and slump over the table after realizing she had mistakenly chugged hardcore soju instead of beer. Amidst the bustling streets of Seoul, Hajin hastily got his dead-drunk wife into a taxi to head home while the sound of his name being called still echoed urgently. Hajin decisively claimed the right to take Eun-ah home, making the pink-haired friend couldn't help but wonder, because he had previously said he still had to meet the bar owner. He casually explained that he had finalized the job while paying the bill, simultaneously dealing a low blow by pointing out that her new friend group didn't even know where she lived. Hearing the friend mention her old address in the XX-dong area, Hajin instantly denied it and asserted that Eun-ah had moved away a long time ago while hastily shutting the taxi door. With a highly suspicious face, the pink-haired friend pressed to know about her new place, but only received a profound, mysterious look from the other party. Hajin employed an evasion tactic, coldly declaring that he had no right to disclose it and telling everyone to go ask her themselves. The taxi quickly rolled away and disappeared into the night, leaving the friend group standing rooted to the spot in the middle of the street with a messy jumble of questions. The pink-haired friend sank into deep thought, wondering to herself why a stranger could know Eun-ah's private address so thoroughly. Just as the atmosphere was getting suffocating, the friend accompanying Hajin suddenly blushed and revealed a shocking truth that they were not merely friends. He excitedly talked about the deep ties between their two families and their 17 years of being childhood sweethearts before they officially dated and then broke up. The information regarding the identity of the ex-boyfriend who had just returned from abroad left the pink-haired friend completely stunned, bewildered by Eun-ah's past secret. The pink-haired friend pouted in pure sarcasm, thinking to herself that Hajin's overly caring actions towards his ex were truly too bizarre considering he already had a new girlfriend. Park Jae-won was still in shock. She restlessly pressed the accompanying friend on whether letting those two leave together like that was truly okay. Her eyes still followed the silhouette of the taxi fading into the night, an indescribable sense of unease rising in her heart regarding the secret Eun-ah was deliberately hiding. Jae-won's face suddenly turned profound as she silently pieced together the strange events that had just occurred, sensing an invisible bond connecting the two of them. Back at the apartment, a dead-drunk Eun-ah staggered into the house with echoing cheers, making Hajin fly into a rage and yell, demanding she absolutely not wear her shoes inside. Looking at his nominal wife writhing on the bed, Hajin pulled a hair-tearing move in utter helplessness, then lamented that her drinking habits were truly a disaster. He struggled and exerted all his effort to take off her tight shoes for her, while Eun-ah just lay still with a flushed face and breath reeking of alcohol. Hajin leaned in close and interrogated her to see if she was sober at all yet, but answering him was only the sluggish gaze of the little girl drowning in a stupor. Eun-ah suddenly sat bolt upright. She narrowed her eyes, trying to compose herself, and then stammered a question, asking if the person right in front of her eyes was truly Ju Hajin. With trembling hands gently touching his face, she choked up, affirming the presence of the man she had been longing for all this time. Hajin smirked meaningfully, casually pressing to know if there existed another fake Ju Hajin in this world. Answering that skepticism was Eun-ah's foolish smile as she firmly asserted the existence of a silhouette that was always present. With trembling hands lightly touching his face, she bitterly confessed that all the illusions of him in her dreams all this time were fake. Hajin coldly unleashed a decisive standing-up move, demanding she quickly go to sleep instead of continuing to speak delirious words. However, the tearful call of his name from behind suddenly became the savior that held back the footsteps of the man, freezing him in place. Eun-ah pulled a clinging move by tightly gripping his shirt hem, sobbing and begging him not to suddenly disappear one more time. Hajin's eyes darkened with extreme complexity. He turned around and questioned her in bewilderment at the shattered emotions pouring out of the little girl. Seeing that Eun-ah had completely taken over the bed along with her teddy bear, he snapped, asking who had given her permission to encroach on his privacy. Yet, facing that pitiful look, Hajin could only click his tongue in sheer helplessness, then dropped a promise to generously let it slide for her this one and only time. The room sank into silence as Eun-ah fell asleep, her mouth softly muttering an affirmation that she would only allow herself to be weak for the rest of this night. Ha-jin stood in a daze in the middle of the room, seemingly undergoing a fierce internal struggle after the highly vulnerable confessions of his nominal wife. He ruffled his hair in sheer frustration, trying to brush away his deviant thoughts to maintain his rationality against the destructive power of the alcohol god, Eun-ah. Finally, the man quietly turned his back and walked away, leaving behind the suffocating atmosphere and the small figure sinking into a deep sleep. In a pitiful chibi form, Eun-ah rolled around next to her teddy bear and continuously begged him to generously forgive her just one more time. She continued to deploy her whining tactics while looking at the messy pile of books and notebooks on the desk, secretly blaming herself for being too lazy. Eun-ah unexpectedly launched a clinging move on Ha-jin, pleading with all her might for him to temporarily put studying aside to relax with her. Ha-jin pressed his hand down on the bed to maintain his distance, asking her in a deep voice to stay calm so he could talk properly. He put on a serious face and reminded her that the main purpose of today's meeting was to study together, but the only response was a highly resentful pout from his little wife. Eun-ah sulkily made an excuse that she had already tried her best, so now was the time for a short break to recharge her brain. In his chibi form, Ha-jin coldly exposed the truth, asserting that for the past hour, she had only been busy using her phone without touching a single word. Eun-ah unleashed her bratty clinging move, hugging Ha-jin tightly and screaming her demand that he dedicate this entire day to going out with her. Ha-jin blushed in deep embarrassment upon hearing her bitterly complaining about how lately they hadn't had any dates or even a sincere hug. She continued to deploy her playing the victim move, reproaching him for always being too busy at school and only knowing how to bury his head in books after class. Eun-ah tightened her embrace and choked up, asking if in his eyes she was any different from a normal friend considering she was always being ignored like this. Facing her persistent clinging, Ha-jin gave a faint smile of surrender and casually promised to indulge her every wish to make up for the past few days. She instantly cheered in extreme excitement, her eyes shining with joy upon receiving a sweet confirmation beyond her imagination. Amidst the room littered with books, a fleeting moment of contemplation suddenly appeared in Eun-ah's eyes regarding the consequences of this marriage contract. She casually snuggled deep into Ha-jin's arms under the warm blanket, silently confessing that she also didn't want to bet her life just for a date. The image of her grandfather and his imposing iron cane appeared like a stern warning about the terrifying consequences if they dared to disobey him. Eun-ah smugly thought that hiding well under the blanket was the best way to blind the world's eyes, even as Ha-jin silently lamented that this action only made them look even more suspicious. Eun-ah deployed her pleading tactics, earnestly begging Ha-jin to generously let it slide this time because her mind had been so unstable lately that she couldn't sleep. She casually compared relying on him to hugging a giant teddy bear, making her feel incredibly secure enough to fall into a deep slumber. In her drunken stupor, she didn't forget to instruct Ha-jin that if he ever had trouble finding sleep in the future, he should just contact her immediately. Eun-ah asserted that regardless of whether it was late night or early morning, she was ready to climb walls to be by his side, proving a fierce affection that nothing could stop. Her eyes wavered slightly, holding hidden sorrows and a rare vulnerability revealed before the man who had once left her. The dialogues about breaking her grandfather's iron cane if they unfortunately got caught suddenly returned like a highly sarcastic reminder of reality. Ha-jin profoundly executed a gentle wake-up move, his hands lightly touching her hair to pull her out of her chaotic dreams. Just as she slightly opened her eyes, Eun-ah panicked and demanded he leave immediately before the nanny appeared and caught this ironic scene red-handed. Ha-jin clearly showed a face of extreme bewilderment and shock. The guy could only gasp in astonishment at the completely incoherent words of his nominal wife. The moment the two lay facing each other, looking deep into each other's eyes under the warm blanket, the atmosphere suddenly became silent and filled with unnameable emotions. Eun-ah let out a piercing scream that shook the entire apartment building upon realizing she had just gone through a highly eventful night. She froze, staring at Ha-jin's shoes, and then harshly interrogated him as to why he dared to casually sleep in the same bed with her. Ha-jin hissed over his injured hand, casually commenting with sarcasm that he never expected his little wife to have such terrifying violent tendencies. Eun-ah narrowed her eyes in suspicion, demanding he honestly confess whether her clinging was just an excuse for him to take advantage. She furiously asserted that he should have decisively pushed her hand away to leave instead of choosing to stay in such a shady manner. Answering that harshness was Hajin's sinister smile, as he declared he would never pass up such a golden opportunity. In his hilarious chibi form, Hajin casually launched a mocking blow, asking if she had learned to drink in moderation after this incident. Eun-ah pressed to know if the injury on his hand was real or fake, while Hajin lamented that it hurt so much it made him unable to go to work. Suddenly recalling the past, she curiously asked for the reason why someone like him had to work so hard at a part-time job. Hajin casually revealed he wanted to buy an expensive item and didn't forget to sarcastically remark that he wasn't the spoiled grandchild of a tycoon like someone else. Eun-ah harshly ordered Hajin to align their stories that they were just friends and absolutely not allowed to act like he knew her at school. She sighed in relief because living in this high-end apartment complex would make it hard to bump into acquaintances, even as Hajin still considerately wanted to carry her bag for her. While pressing the elevator button, Eun-ah silently threatened that if anyone found out they were living together, he would have to suffer torturous consequences. However, the smile on her lips suddenly stiffened. She stammered an apology upon noticing the presence of a stranger in the confined space. It was none other than her friend Ji-won with her striking pink hair, standing silently and radiating an invisible pressure that made Eun-ah jump in sheer terror. In their chibi forms, Eun-ah and Hajin could only stand frozen in total awkwardness, trying to deploy the tactic of pretending to be two strangers who didn't know each other at all. The three stood in silence facing the elevator doors, the atmosphere thick with suspicion as the secret of their cohabitation faced the risk of being exposed. The scene shifted to the vending machine area at school, where a highly dramatic interrogation began to cover up the truth. Ji-won put on a cold demeanor and bluntly asked a highly suspicious question regarding whether the relationship between Eun-ah and her ex-boyfriend was truly just friends. Eun-ah immediately unleashed her excuse-making tactics, asserting that Hajin was just a childhood friend whom her family forced her to interact with and that her heart absolutely held no lingering feelings. Ji-won nodded in agreement, softly recalling that Eun-ah and her ex-boyfriend Hajin truly used to have an incredibly tight-knit relationship. The pink-haired girl continued to dig deep into the past, bringing up the short but memory-filled 8-month dating period from their high school days. Suddenly changing the subject, Ji-won narrowed her eyes in suspicion and bluntly suggested visiting Eun-ah's private apartment tonight. The sudden suggestion made Eun-ah sweat bullets. She was stunned to death upon finding out that Hajin had accidentally let slip about her recent move. In her pitiful chibi form, she hastily unleashed an excuse, claiming that she was living with her nanny, so inviting friends over was incredibly inconvenient. However, Ji-won still refused to let it go, coldly pointing out that Hajin seemed to know every single detail of her secret whereabouts. In a panic, Eun-ah executed a blame-shifting move on the nanny for asking him for a favor, accompanied by a forced smile to cover up her awkwardness. Looking at her friend's weird expression, Ji-won sighed in deep regret, expressing that it was such a waste for a top-tier catch like Hajin to fall into someone else's hands. The pink-haired girl concluded with a firm assertion that poor Ji-dong would never have a chance to step into Eun-ah's heart. Ji-won closed the conversation with a weary sigh, seemingly silently pitying the unfortunate fate of that lovesick guy. The group of students surrounding Ji-dong constantly teased him about his obvious flaws, leaving him awkwardly scratching his head in denial. The atmosphere suddenly shifted when Hyun, a senior upperclassman, appeared and proactively initiated a greeting, making Ji-won hastily reply. Eun-ah curiously pressed to know who the stranger was and was introduced by Ji-won as the incredibly powerful sophomore class president. The senior smirked meaningfully, as if she had already been attracted by the special aura radiating from the freshman girl opposite her. She unexpectedly expressed extreme admiration, asserting she had never met a true influencer in real life until today. Hyun continued to deploy her buttering-up tactic, commenting that the neat dressing style of the new students was truly incredibly attractive and adorable. She casually dealt another critical blow, remarking that it was completely understandable for Ji-dong to be so madly in love with Eun-ah. Eun-ah fell into a bewildered chibi state, wondering to herself if she was being too reserved while Ji-dong kept hesitating to introduce her to everyone. Ji-won showed a dissatisfied attitude and demanded the seniors leave her alone. It seemed she was starting to feel tired of this conversation. Ignoring that resistance, Hein persistently pulled out her phone and earnestly offered a mutual follow on social media right away. The students laughed mockingly and launched a sarcastic attack, claiming that Eun-ah would absolutely never accept an invitation from someone like Ji-dong. Ignoring the teasing, the senior casually laughed and joked, expressing her fear of getting hurt if she unfortunately got rejected by the influencer girl. Seeing Ji-dong blushing in embarrassment, she immediately drilled deep into his emotional wound by bringing up how Eun-ah always used being busy as an excuse to avoid him. Eun-ah pouted in sheer annoyance, silently cursing the gossiping whispers that treated her like an honored guest reigning over the school's lounge. Noticing the strange reaction, the sophomore class president narrowed her eyes in suspicion and pressed to know what the freshman girl had just muttered. Unable to endure it any longer, Eun-ah coldly turned her back and asserted that she had put up with these pointless words for a long time. Her fury erupting, she channeled her inner energy, radiating a murderous aura, and loudly demanded to know what on earth the problem of these seniors was to be so bothersome. Her mind started deploying a venting anger tactic, silently resenting the harsh interference in her personal fashion sense and the overly familiar attitude of people she had just met. Meanwhile, the senior could only stand completely frozen with a dumbfounded face at the harsh pushback, silently reminding her about basic courtesy when being greeted. The atmosphere suddenly froze solid as the sharp gazes of the two women met, signaling an uncompromising war about to break out at the school. The group of friends surrounding Ji-dong excitedly gossiped about his overly obvious flaws, making Eun-ah sitting next to him able to only remain silent in awkwardness. Facing his expectant look, she immediately flashed a cold X sign to extinguish all his unrealistic hopes for a date. On the other side, the senior Hein flew into a raging fit in the middle of the classroom hallway, blurting out a question of whether Eun-ah had completely lost her mind. Her exploding rage made her slam her hand hard on the table, gritting her teeth and wondering why a mere freshman girl dared to insolently talk back to her like that. Hein deployed her lioness roar, screaming loudly in the middle of the crowd that money or the title of influencer meant nothing to justify such extreme arrogance. Seeing the older girl losing control, Ji-dong hastily spoke up to stop her and reminded her that he had warned her early on not to get involved in this mess. The guy tried his best to defend her, saying Eun-ah wasn't bad at all, and pressed Hein on whether her actions just now actually carried any other meaning. Ji-dong delivered a blunt strike, asserting that Eun-ah was merely speaking her mind, and it was the senior who had initiated the rudeness first. Her ego struck. Hein smirked and sarcastically asked if a talking stage truly existed between the two of them, or if it was all just the guy's delusion. Ji-dong immediately rebutted fiercely, firmly declaring that she had given him the green light and even proactively handed him her personal phone number. Gu-won casually dropped a contemptuous remark, likening the noisy students in the lounge to a bunch of foolish fish disturbing his sleep, leaving Eun-ah and Ji-dong completely frozen in bewilderment upon realizing the guy had actually been sleeping here this whole time. Not bothering to care about everyone's embarrassment, Gu-won coldly announced he had a class and decisively walked away. A social media post appeared revealing that Gu-won was a massively influential model, making the friend group undeniably curious about the closeness between the two. Ji-dong frowned in deep suspicion, pressing to know whether that cold-looking man on the screen was truly the famous supermodel Gu-won. Eun-ah casually explained that although they weren't too close, since Gu-won inherently had few friends, she always tried to care for and help him. She strongly denied the rumors about her friend's arrogant personality, asserting that Gu-won was just someone who was awkward at socializing. Strolling through the campus, Ji-won unexpectedly spoke up, pressing to know if Eun-ah was feeling worried about the upcoming events. Eun-ah asked back in bewilderment what on earth she had to care about when all the troubles seemed to have been settled. Ji-won sighed softly and reminded her that even though clapping back at senior Hein was very refreshing, the power of the class president position was still a threat that could not be underestimated. Eun-ah crossed her arms and casually admitted that being envied wasn't exactly a novel experience for a prestigious young lady like her. She quickly realized that people didn't usually hate her for who she truly was, but rather resented the immense wealth she had inherited. The image of her aristocratic grandfather throwing money around without a second thought flashed back like a firm affirmation that all troubles in this world could be settled with gold and silver. With a smug smile, Eun-ah silently marveled that the life of the Chaebol class was truly far more dazzling and extravagant than the rumors suggested. The friend standing next to her frowned slightly in deep suspicion, curiously asking about the close-knit relationship between Eun-ah and Ji-won since childhood. Eun-ah excitedly confirmed that the two had been inseparable like shadow and light since their middle school days. Her friend's eyes suddenly turned mischievous as she pressed about Ji-won's relationship status, wondering if she had truly always been single all this time. After a moment of thought, Eun-ah asserted she had never heard her friend mention dating or seen any guy catch her eye. Her friend smirked calculatingly, revealing that there were currently tons of guys lining up asking her to play matchmaker for a chance to approach the beautiful young lady. Eun-ah smiled radiantly and deployed a praising tactic, fully agreeing that with such beauty and kindness, it was only natural for Ji-won to be highly sought after. Park Ji-won raised an eyebrow meaningfully, bringing up how Chae Eun-ah once claimed her ex-boyfriend now had a new beauty by his side. Hearing this, Eun-ah jolted in shock, her eyes widening in bewilderment as she wondered whose woman her friend was referring to. Ji-won continued to interrogate whether her ex's new girlfriend went to the same school, leaving her only able to stammer and evade, claiming she had absolutely no idea. Eun-ah hastily deployed a cover-up move by asserting they were just childhood friends and their brief dating history made it rather uncomfortable for them to cross paths. She gave a forced smile and explained that Hajin was studying in the business department, a place completely separate from her schedule. With an utterly confident face, she firmly declared that the chances of them accidentally bumping into each other on this massive college campus were incredibly low. However, the atmosphere suddenly froze solid when Ji-won wondered what on earth was going on upon spotting a familiar silhouette passing right behind them. Right before their eyes was Ju Hajin casually walking by with a cold demeanor, beside him a hot blonde girl laughing and chatting radiantly. Ji-won slightly smirked and deployed a sarcastic move, commenting that speaking of the devil brings him right there, and this coincidence was truly one in a million. While her friend was busy praising the beauty of the girl accompanying Hajin, Eun-ah could only sigh in relief, thinking the burden of her secret marriage had finally been lifted. While chatting, Chae Eun-ah suddenly froze, her eyes wavering in deep suspicion before hastily blurting out that she had urgent business to take care of right away. Despite Ji-won shouting a warning from behind not to foolishly stalk her ex-boyfriend, she hastily deployed her escape tactic to rush off and find the truth. Eun-ah rushed around the campus, her mind a mess as she firmly believed her nominal husband had just turned down this path with another beauty. Memories of him causing a scene at school suddenly rushed back, making her bitterly and silently resent how he dared to casually flirt with someone else after everything he'd done. With a face radiating a murderous aura and a blazing momentum, she was determined not to let him off the hook easily and aggressively charged straight into the building. But then the radiant smile and utterly satisfied expression of the strange blonde girl intimately chatting beside Hajin suddenly appeared as clear as day. Her feet suddenly stopped dead right in the middle of the hallway. All her initial plans to confront him seemed to vanish, giving way to a numbing sense of disappointment. Her eyes wavered fiercely, silently telling herself that she had never before felt so desperate or cared this much because of anyone. That sight left Eun-ah stunned, her eyes dropping in sheer heartache upon realizing she was witnessing something her heart absolutely did not desire. Looking at that man's back, Eun-ah silently resented why he could so easily mess with her mind and lamented that this reality was truly too uncomfortable. Hajin turned back to look with utter indifference, softly asking if there was something wrong going on behind him. In front of him was the blonde girl flashing a radiant smile, the two sitting close together on a stone bench, like a couple on a date. Eun-ah jolted and pressed herself behind the university's wall corner, her hands tightly gripping the hem of her short skirt, silently replying in sheer hopelessness that nothing was wrong at all. With her face flushed red from embarrassment, She constantly worried and asked herself if her sharp nominal husband had spotted her yet. She realized he had turned around too abruptly, forcing her to deploy a stealth move out of pure instinct without having time to think further. In a hilarious, tiny form, Eun-ah furiously ruffled her hair and scolded herself for being an idiot, stooping to this dignity-lowering act of stalking. Squatting down to hide her silhouette, she began to contemplate with deep skepticism whether she was truly doing something wrong. Her eyes suddenly turned sharp as she found an excuse for herself, firmly asserting that in this relationship, the cheater was the one at fault. With a face full of pride and confidence, she boldly declared that a man and a woman having such shady private conversations was basically an act of betrayal. Facing the critique about her being old-fashioned, Eun-ah closed her eyes and admitted it, but silently fired back that technically he was the one who deserved the most condemnation. Eun-ah stared blankly into space, her mind still haunted by the overwhelming presence of the man she had just encountered. In the quiet space of the building, she slumped onto the floor in sheer helplessness, facing a strange guy who was calmly occupying the waiting bench. In a highly panicked tiny form, she deployed a defensive tactic by letting out a piercing scream to interrogate the identity of the person silently observing her. The other party was a rugged guy with messy brown hair, a cigarette dangling carelessly from the corner of his mouth, and a gaze that seemed to see right through all her thoughts. The guy's expression suddenly turned cold and sharp, as if he was secretly mocking the clumsiness and exaggerated expressions of the girl opposite him. Upon seeing the smoking area sign hanging on the wall, Eun-ah was shocked to realize she had accidentally trespassed into a stranger's private territory. Under the sun-drenched sky of Hankook University, the main building stood tall, as if witnessing a highly troublesome encounter about to unfold. The sign designating the smoking area still rested quietly on the wall, portraying the contrast between the guy's composure and her bewilderment. Eun-ah's jaw dropped in sheer astonishment, her eyes unable to hide the shock mixed with a bit of admiration for the stranger's rugged aura. The level of chaos in her heart reached its peak when the guy casually commented on her recent performance, making her want to sink into the ground upon realizing he had witnessed the entire ordeal. The brown-haired guy smirked with a rugged charm, calmly asking if he could finally light his cigarette now. In a thoroughly embarrassed tiny form, Eun-ah deployed an apology tactic by bowing repeatedly and urging him to casually go ahead with his own business. She brought her hands up to ruffle her hair in frustration, bitterly lamenting that today was truly not her lucky day as the guy behind her leisurely lit his smoke. Eun-ah's eyes suddenly became deep and thoughtful. She kept wondering why that rugged guy's face brought about such a strangely familiar feeling. With her legs trembling from embarrassment, she silently prayed she would never have to bump into this man possessing such a rugged aura ever again. Eun-ah's eyes suddenly widened in shock upon hearing her name called out from behind, accompanied by an extreme fear that they might be in the same class. Facing her right in the hallway was the towering figure of Hajin, instantly making the atmosphere more suffocating and tense than ever before. In a state of extreme panic, Eun-ah deployed a freezing move, stammering an interrogation about her nominal husband's highly unexpected appearance right here. Unexpectedly, a hot blonde girl suddenly appeared with a meaningful smile, exclaiming her surprise at the unbelievable truth unfolding before her. The strange girl approached with a radiant face, officially confirming that the identity of the person standing in front of her was indeed the prestigious young lady Chae Eun-ah. Eun-ah's jaw dropped in shock upon realizing the identity of the hot blonde girl in front of her was none other than B. The quiet cafe space suddenly became the witness to a highly unexpected reunion between old friends after years of separation. On the wooden tray were cups of coffee and sweet cake slices, completely contrasting with the turmoil currently happening in her mind. She closed her eyes and silently blamed herself for being too naive for not recognizing Bomb sooner, thereby putting herself in a highly ridiculous, jealous situation. Right before her eyes was the 20-year-old COBOM radiantly deploying a sunny smile and expressing her boundless joy at reuniting with her close older sister. In a highly playful chibi form, BOM didn't hesitate to snap back at Hajin's bossy orders, officially revealing herself as his mischievous younger cousin. School day memories vividly flooded back through an old photograph, where Eun-ah and Bomb were once inseparable like shadow and light under the same high school roof. Eun-ah held the paper napkin with a dazed face, her heart endlessly lamenting about this unlucky day that constantly threw her into ironic situations. Bomb enthusiastically continued her story, revealing that thanks to Hajin, she knew they were attending the same school and had always looked forward to a meeting like this. Eun-ah smiled and recalled how the whole group had cried so much when she moved to Busan, and began formulating a plan to gather the old friend group back together soon. Bom gently rested her chin on her hand, dropping a highly meaningful question about the current relationship between Eun-ah and her best friend Jiwon. Eun-ah casually confirmed their long-standing bond, despite her nominal husband's younger cousin making a demand not to see strangers during their private gatherings. She suddenly went silent, her eyes wavering upon realizing that the atmosphere between the two old friends seemed to still hold countless untied knots. While enjoying her slice of cake, Eun-ah silently questioned the true cause that had led to the fierce argument, making them no longer able to face each other like before. Everything suddenly turned chaotic when Bomb accidentally spilled her water, leaving Hajin only able to sigh wearily and urge his cousin to quickly use wet wipes to clean it up. Eun-ah tried to regain her seriousness, hesitating to speak up in order to clarify a sensitive issue currently engulfing her mind. But then Bom was a step faster, launching a critical question and demanding the two of them admit whether they had truly gotten back together or not. Facing this sudden attack, Eun-ah panicked to the extreme and deployed an utter denial tactic, continuously stammering to reject any possibility of getting back together. With a face flushed red from embarrassment, she gave a forced smile and turned to look at Hajin, as if seeking an agreeable confirmation to cover up their marriage secret. However, the man only responded with a highly cold side glance, his eyes deeply quiet as if hiding untouchable thoughts. Bom slightly smirked and deployed a meaningful smile, casually nodding to confirm the accuracy of her speculations about this shady relationship. To Eun-ah's shock, Hajin in his chibi form unexpectedly declared he would play along with this game, leaving her only able to stammer in panic and interrogate what trick he was planning to pull. Just as the atmosphere was getting tense, a phone suddenly rang. Hajin immediately stood up and left the table, instructing the two girls to feel free to enjoy their meal. While the other man began his conversation, Eun-ah could only deploy a tension relief tactic by busily drinking water to hide the dryness currently engulfing her throat. Through the phone signal, Hajin quietly listened to the past being brought up, that everyone knew how the fool back then had once loved the young lady to the point of madness. The image of the young couple in high school suddenly appeared like a romantic movie clip, recalling a love story that everyone once believed would last a lifetime. Long, slender fingers gently stirred the coffee in a moody state, as someone silently lamented that the two of them eventually having to break up was truly a massive pity. Eun-ah hastily flashed a radiant smile and deployed an evasion tactic, firmly assuring the person opposite her that those things had long passed. Seeing right through her older sister's awkwardness, Bom gently dropped a regretful comment that the two of them truly used to look incredibly good together. The blonde girl suddenly turned away with a pensive gaze, blurting out that in some aspect, she actually felt a bit relieved at this reality. Bom lowered her voice and recalled the memory of the time Eun-ah had trekked all the way down to Busan just to search for Hajin's silhouette in utter desperation. The image of a lonely Eun-ah with trembling shoulders returned like proof of a heart that had truly reached the limits of being shattered. Returning to the present, the younger cousin looked straight into her eyes with worry and pressed to know if she was truly feeling better now. Eun-ah went completely silent for a moment, her mind seemingly still engulfed by the lingering echoes of the past that couldn't be appeased. Outside the glass window, the tall back of Hajin, who was busy with his phone call, suddenly appeared distant and full of mystery. The young lady's eyes suddenly wavered fiercely. She gently bit her lip, as if trying to brace herself to cover up the sorrows currently boiling inside. Eun-ah unexpectedly flashed a radiant smile and deployed an optimism tactic, boldly declaring that she currently didn't care in the slightest about the past. In a highly relieved chibi form, Bom confessed she was once very afraid her appearance would create an awkward atmosphere for the both of them. She continued to open up about the bloodline-related troubles following the breakup, making the space suddenly feel heavy. Gently squeezing the paper napkin in her hand, Bom firmly asserted that Hajin returning to Busan proved this was definitely not a simple breakup. Bom smiled softly as she reminisced about their encounter, but suddenly paused when a doubt about Hajin began to pop into her head. She tilted her head in sheer bewilderment, her eyes clearly showing confusion at the conflicting streams of information that had just crossed her mind. Hearing this, Eun-ah was completely shocked, her eyes widening blankly as she silently raised a huge question mark about whether Hajin had actually stayed in South Korea all this time. Her cousin continuously interrogated her, recalling how Eun-ah had traveled all the way down to Busan to search and revealing that she only tagged along in hopes he would answer her calls. Eun-ah's face suddenly turned pale. She sweated profusely and deployed a denial tactic, stubbornly insisting that Hajin must definitely be studying abroad. However, a deep voice rang out from the opposite side as if to extinguish all hope, calling her by name to prepare to unleash a cruel truth. Amidst the quiet space of the cafe, Bomb began to deploy a truth-revealing tactic even while admitting she didn't fully grasp all the hidden intricacies behind it. Her cousin's eyes became extremely serious as she delivered a fatal blow, firmly asserting that for the past 2 years, Hajin had always been in South Korea, without ever leaving. Standing blankly in front of the rushing faucet, Eun-ah muttered Ju Hajin's name in a choked sob, a sense of betrayal beginning to invade her entire mind. Her eyes dropped in bitter sadness, silently repeating the harsh truth that the man she trusted the most had secretly deceived her for 2 long years. Eun-ah started and turned around with a bewildered look upon hearing her name called in a deep voice from behind. Hajin deployed a decisive move by reaching out to turn off the running faucet, cutting off her vague train of thought. He approached, anxiously asking if she was really all right, standing blankly in the middle of the kitchen like a statue. With sharp, caring eyes, that man continued to question if she was feeling unwell or facing any trouble. Hajin gently placed his hand on Eun-ah's forehead to check her temperature, silently concluding that she seemed to be running a slight fever at the moment. He ordered her to quickly sit down on a chair and rest while he hurriedly deployed a tactic to search for medication. Hajin rummaged through all the cabinets, his mouth constantly affirming for sure that he had left the medicine box somewhere around here. While waiting, Eun-ah sat blankly at the table and wondered whether her cousin Bom genuinely knew absolutely nothing about their marriage. Hajin held the medicine bottle in his hand, explaining that it was the chairman's wish to keep everything a secret until graduation to avoid controversies about an overly young heir. Eun-ah rested her chin on her hand, reflecting apologetically, silently admitting that she had been too flustered on her wedding day to notice the hidden intricacies unfolding around her. Hajin suddenly froze upon hearing Eun-ah question the strange absence of his parents at the wedding, silently admitting that the feeling at that time was truly very unsettling. Sitting thoughtfully at the dining table, Eun-ah expressed her confusion, unable to imagine that her grandfather could be so heartless as to stop his parents from attending. Hajin sweated lightly and deployed an evasion tactic, awkwardly explaining that his parents were currently still abroad. Eun-ah narrowed her eyes in suspicion at the new information, continuously interrogating her fake husband as to why they weren't in Busan as she had always imagined. Faced with her pressure, Hajin could only silently bow his head, his eyes dropping full of hidden thoughts as if trying to conceal a heartbreaking truth. Turning her back to the man behind her, the young lady bitterly admitted that for the past 20 years she had been confident she understood him better than anyone else. The image of teenage Hajin came back radiantly like an old film, making Eun-ah bitterly wonder if the older brother she once knew really existed. Suddenly, she deployed a decisive move by slamming her hand on the table, bravely declaring that she was ready to let it go if he truly had his own hardships. Their legs stood facing each other in the stifling space of the kitchen, creating an atmosphere tense to the point of suffocation. Eun-ah looked straight into Hajin's eyes with a resolute expression, boldly demanding him to honestly reveal the reason why he suddenly left that year. In the quiet kitchen, Eun-ah stood facing Hajin, the atmosphere suddenly becoming extremely tense as she began to question him about the past. Hajin sweat nervously, his eyes wavering with a look of unease and awkwardness before the unexpected fierce determination of the girl opposite him. Refusing to back down, Eun-ah pursed her lips in determination, seemingly having made up her mind to end all the ambiguity that had been clouding her mind for so long. She suddenly reached out and deployed a tactic of pointing straight at her fake husband's face, calling him out by name like an uncompromising declaration of war. With a face full of murderous intent, Eun-ah boldly declared that he was officially eliminated from the game at this very moment. She continued to land a fatal blow with a throat-slashing gesture, firmly asserting that Hajin would have to disappear from her life forever. In an angry chibi form, she screamed in reproach, asking why he kept staying silent, making it impossible for her to understand the situation that year. But right after that, Eun-ah flashed a cold, dark smile, asserting that she now didn't care in the slightest about the reason he left. Before this rapid change in attitude, Hajin could only stand frozen with a face flushed from shock, intending to open his mouth to defend himself, but choking on bitterness. Eun-ah narrowed her eyes in disdain, issuing an ultimatum demanding him to quickly stay away from her because the eldest lady's patience had officially run out. BOM awkwardly apologized over the phone for accidentally slipping the secret, silently thinking to herself that she thought Eun-ah already knew everything inside out. Hajin calmly replied that today's unexpected clash was out of anticipation, but either way, she would have found out the truth sooner or later. Unaware that the two were living together, BOM anxiously clenched her hands and continuously asked if Hajin could contact her cousin right now. Hajin scratched his head in frustration, admitting that his wife was throwing a massive fit, while also revealing that he had just finished talking to the nanny to trace her whereabouts. Looking at the completely empty room, he silently sighed upon hearing the news that the eldest lady had left early right after waking up. In a guilt-ridden chibi form, Baum sweated profusely and silently lamented that this time Eun-ah was definitely mad beyond salvation. At his cousin-in-law's offer to go look together, Hajin confidently deployed a refusal tactic because he had grasped all of her habits. With a sharp gaze, he firmly asserted that the only place Eun-ah would go to vent her anger was the boutiques to max out her credit cards. Just as predicted, an image of sparkling manicure hands suddenly appeared along with excited cheering sounds after deploying a shopping tactic. Eun-ah broke into a radiant smile deploying an enjoyment tactic, boldly declaring that she was extremely satisfied with this new, luxurious look. The nail salon staff enthusiastically praised Eun-ah's radiant complexion and curiously asked if something good had just happened to her. Looking at the luxurious designer bags stacked at her feet, it was clear the young lady had just deployed a reckless shopping spree tactic to release the fury inside her. Eun-ah smirked slightly with calculation, asserting that she was fully utilizing this opportunity to execute an important plan. Leaving the salon with a radiant smile, she happily promised to return soon while the staff respectfully bowed to see the customer off. The nail salon staff gave an awkward, flustered smile, silently sensing the gloomy atmosphere like withered flowers enveloping the young lady's mind. In an excited chibi form, Eun-ah boldly declared that new things are always the best and would surely look way more eye-catching than old ones. She deployed a radiant smile and a liquidation tactic, determined to throw away all of her outdated old items to renew her life. Standing in the elevator with hands heavy with designer bags, Eun-ah smiled with contentment, but hidden deep within her eyes was a haunting sharpness. Darkness gradually enveloped the high-end apartment building under the pale sunset, signaling an uncompromising confrontation about to begin. Eun-ah deployed a decisive continuous card-swiping combo, repeatedly demanding one-time full payments to max out the credit limit in order to retaliate against Hajin. Eun-ah gave a contented smile after maxing out the cards, silently lamenting that spending money is also a grueling job and now she just wanted to go home, take a bath, and rest. Standing in the elevator with a pile of designer goods in her hands, her mind suddenly wavered as she unconsciously wondered whether her fake husband was home yet at this hour. Just as she stepped out of the elevator, Eun-ah slightly furrowed her brows, blaming herself for why she had to waste her energy thinking about that detestable man so much. In her fluster, she deployed a tactic of hitting her own head with a shopping bag, causing a child walking by to exclaim in surprise at her bizarre action. Returning to the elevator, Eun-ah crossed her arms decisively and made up her mind to keep her distance in order to officially cross Ju Hajin's name out of her life. In an innocent chibi form, she told herself to just quietly focus on graduating and not let anything else distract her any further. But a romantic figure suddenly appeared with a nonchalant reminder to just quietly graduate, leaving her stunned. Eun-ah's face suddenly changed color, her eyes widening in bewilderment as she realized the unexpected presence of the strange guy she had just run into that morning. The man's sharp gaze and Eun-ah's shocked expression met in the quiet hallway, creating a highly pressured and awkward atmosphere. Watching the cold elevator doors close, the young lady stood blankly rooted to the spot with countless speculations about the true identity of that strange guy. Eun-ah stood frozen with eyes widened in pure shock upon officially confirming the guy in front of her was indeed the one she accidentally bumped into at the school's smoking area. She stared intently at his romantic, careless side profile, silently telling herself no wonder she found this face extremely familiar from the very beginning. Memories of the time the three of them accidentally bumped into each other in the elevator suddenly rushed back, throwing Eun-ah into a state of extreme panic for fear that her cohabitation secret would be exposed. In an evasive chibi form, she silently sighed in relief seeing that the other party didn't seem to recognize her and just prayed for the doors to open soon so she could escape. However, the atmosphere suddenly grew tense when the romantic guy suddenly deployed a meaningful side glance tactic toward the woman standing timidly. Sweating profusely, Eun-ah deployed an awkward, flustered smile as she started feeling uneasy under the strange guy's highly pressured stare. The chimes signaling the stop at the 24th floor rang like a savior, giving her more motivation to quickly leave this high-pressure space. Eun-ah's legs lifted slightly in a rush. She held her breath, getting ready for a lightning-fast escape the moment the elevator doors managed to crack open. The young lady hurriedly deployed an escape tactic by clutching her designer bags tight and rushing out like a gust of wind, leaving all the turmoil and doubts behind her. Suddenly, a sturdy hand reached out accompanied by a shout demanding her to stop, making Eun-ah's heart instantly leap out of her chest due to the unexpected interruption. The romantic guy reached out and deployed a blocking tactic, shouting loudly to demand Eun-ah to stop her tracks immediately when he saw she was about to face an accident. He let out a soft sigh in utter exhaustion, seemingly having just gone through a heart-stopping moment dealing with an unexpected situation. Gu-won calmly picked up the red handbag she had just dropped, while Eun-ah could only sit flat on the floor looking at him with a bewildered expression. In a thoroughly confused chibi form, the young lady deployed a freeze tactic with a series of question marks popping up as she didn't understand what was happening. While the guy nonchalantly asserted everything was fine, Eun-ah secretly glanced at him with a probing look, unable to help but wonder about the other's mysterious whereabouts. She pouted and deployed a sulking tactic, secretly resenting the guy's coldness as he didn't even bother to pay the slightest mind to her presence. Eun-ah hurriedly deployed a retrieval tactic by snatching the bag from his hand, dropping an awkward thank you, then intending to quickly head inside her house. The guy's eyes suddenly became sharp and profound. He silently observed that the important item inside still seemed intact after the collision. Suddenly, Eun-ah's gaze was drawn to the watch on his wrist, silently exclaiming in awe as she realized it was a prestigious brand far beyond imagination. She concluded this wasn't just a watch studded with gemstones, but an engineering masterpiece with hands that seemed to levitate in midair, a testament to its owner's extraordinary status. Gu-won threw Eun-ah a razor-sharp look, nonchalantly declaring he had expected her to understand that better than anyone else. He continued to strike another psychological blow when mentioning her illustrious family background, a lineage that always worshipped traditional values and exquisite craftsmanship. The elevator doors closed coldly, leaving a chibi Eun-ah standing frozen with a squared face, unable to react in time to the other's indifference. In sheer panic, she mentally screamed in terror as she realized the secret of her true identity had been caught onto by that strange guy. The scene shifted to the daily coffee shop under the morning sun, where a dramatic reunion seemed about to take place to clear up all doubts. Sitting blankly with a highly depressed chibi face, Eun-ah continuously tapped her fingers lightly on the table, blaming herself for being too careless and exposing a loophole. Park Ji-won, sitting opposite, spoke up to shatter the suffocating atmosphere by pressing about the actual situation unfolding that made her friend so bothered. Eun-ah immediately deployed a probing tactic. Resting her chin on her hand in deep thought, she asked Ji-won if she had heard of anyone in the school possessing a vastly distinct appearance. In a resentful chibi form, she started describing that mysterious guy as a lanky fellow, possessing fiery red hair along with extremely edgy earrings. Ji-won quickly held out her phone to confirm his identity, making Eun-ah, despite immense hatred in her heart, bitterly admit that he was indeed very handsome. Eun-ah deployed a target confirmation tactic, screaming with excitement upon seeing the photo on the phone and pressing her friend for her lightning-fast search secret. Ji-won nonchalantly took a sip of water and explained that this school was rare in handsome guys, and besides, that character was an extremely famous senior. She continued to introduce that muscular guy as Gu-won, a professional supermodel possessing a massive following on social media. Hearing this, Eun-ah in her chibi form suddenly sweated profusely, silently concluding that the exact number of 870,000 followers was what exposed her identity. She then threw out an innocent question as to why an illustrious model would appear at a school with no specialized training department for it. However, a sudden critical blow struck, making Eun-ah want to collapse upon learning that Gu-won was a sophomore senior studying in the same fashion design department as her. Facing Ji-won's probing gaze, the young lady flusteredly deployed a reality evasion tactic, awkwardly justifying that she was only curious because his style was too unique. Anxiety began to surround Eun-ah's mind as she silently thought that frequent encounters in the department would make her college life extremely pressured. Ji-won suddenly changed the subject with an invitation to attend the freshman welcome party, receiving a reluctant nod from her troubled friend. Eun-ah sat thoughtfully by her glass of water, her eyes distant, as if having a premonition about the unnamed troubles about to strike at tonight's party. Ji-won suddenly paused when a bad premonition about the upcoming freshman party unexpectedly flashed in her mind. Eun-ah deployed an anxious probing tactic, continuously asking whether the upperclassmen seniors would also be fully present tonight. The atmosphere suddenly exploded with cheers to bottoms up, marking the beginning of an exciting and vibrant drinking party. In a thoughtful chibi form, Eun-ah quietly took a large sip of beer while silently sighing, because even though she had found her target, things were not easy at all. The party table filled with fried chicken and cold beer amidst the bustling atmosphere seemingly could not soothe the growing sense of isolation in her heart. The young lady then deployed a quick getaway tactic by making an excuse to go to the convenience store, silently resolving to take this opportunity to sneak home as early as possible. Eun-ah narrowed her eyes in pure frustration at the empty glass, silently blaming herself for not being able to find any opening to approach the mysterious guy amidst the frantic crowd. Across the room, Gu-won was sitting imposingly surrounded by girls, nonchalantly tapping his phone, ignoring the commotion enveloping his surroundings. A female student deployed a boy-crazy ultimate move, her face flushed with excitement as she endlessly praised the illustrious senior's extremely cool appearance. The beauty continued to unleash a barrage of attacks by complimenting his perfect physique and earnestly requesting a follow-back on social media despite her drunken state. Gu-won nonchalantly tapped his cigarette pack on the table, coldly announcing that he was going outside to smoke. Eun-ah's eyes suddenly wavered as she flusteredly followed the tall back of the illustrious supermodel guy. In the hazy smoke, Gu-won's romantic, careless demeanor appeared clearly under the streetlights, creating an extremely irresistible allure. Unable to hold back her admiration, the girl in her chibi form sneakily tailed behind and unconsciously blurted out an excited compliment. Eun-ah deployed a radiant smile, pretending to coincidentally bump into him and cheering in sheer amazement at this fateful reunion. She excitedly expressed her surprise upon knowing he was a senior in the same department, while Gu-won only replied with an indifferent expression about how small the world is. To cover her embarrassment, she then threw out an excuse of going to feed the cats and cross-examined if he really came out here just to smoke. Gu-won's sturdy hand gently twirled the cigarette. He stayed silent for a moment before suddenly dropping an interrogation that made the atmosphere extremely tense. Eun-ah, completely petrified with a pale chibi face upon hearing the model guy bluntly ask if she was secretly stalking him. Noticing the other's extreme awkwardness, he retracted his attack with a nonchalant remark, leaving her frozen with a series of question marks in her head. Gu-won indifferently dropped an apology if he had accidentally offended her and turned to walk away, leaving Eun-ah in her chibi form with her mouth wide open in shock. Not missing the chance, she frantically deployed a chasing tactic, loudly demanding the illustrious senior to halt immediately. Eun-ah blushed shyly, assuming that studying at the same school and living on the same floor was destiny's arrangement, while simultaneously expressing her wish to consult him on an important matter. The distance suddenly narrowed, making the atmosphere ambiguous. Gu-won slightly bowed his head, requesting her to step back a bit before starting the conversation. His face suddenly became thoughtful as he noted that as a celebrity, Eun-ah would certainly understand the pressures he was bearing. A mouse suddenly appeared on the tip of his shoe as a reminder that the glamorous world of an influencer is always a lucrative target for scandalous gossip. In an innocent chibi form, she continuously called the senior's name and pressed whether he was actually listening to her confidences. Seeing the other suddenly fall silent with a blank face, Eun-ah narrowed her eyes in suspicion and anxiously asked if he was having any problems. The quiet atmosphere of the late night was suddenly ripped apart by a shrill scream echoing throughout the building, accompanied by a panicky plea to stop. A dry thud rang out on the ground like a period to an unexpected incident that had just occurred right in the middle of the empty hallway. Gu-won threw Eun-ah a razor-sharp look, silently reading through the tangled thoughts in the girl's mind opposite him. Eun-ah blankly admired the senior's romantic beauty, her eyes wavering with pure shyness before this overwhelmingly dominant presence. An unexpected incident caused both to take a tumble. She deployed a tactic of pressing close to his sturdy chest to avoid a heavy collision. In a thoroughly shocked chibi form, Eun-ah suddenly petrified upon realizing she was committing an overly intimate act right in the middle of the street. Gu-won sweated lightly, deploying an interrogation tactic, awkwardly pressing to see if his junior was encountering any trouble. Tears suddenly burst out. She sat flat on the ground, sobbing and whining about the pain tormenting both the physical and mental state of the eldest young lady. The senior then deployed a first aid tactic, gently cradling and inspecting her trembling hands with utmost care. Sitting on a stone bench under the streetlight, he nonchalantly dropped a reproach and demanded she stop acting spoiled like a child. Eun-ah pursed her lips in deep resentment, bitterly admitting that he would never understand the heart-piercing pain of having an injured fingernail like this. Gu-won gently held her hand, boldly asking whether that favor was truly so important that it made her risk her life rushing over like that. Gu-won muttered softly with anxiety upon realizing the cut on Eun-ah's hand was deeper than expected, and firmly asserted that it couldn't be allowed to scar. Eun-ah blankly watched his every attentive gesture, her eyes suddenly softening at the unexpected care from the illustrious model guy. The atmosphere suddenly became lighter as Gu-won let out a soft laugh. He seemingly was silently mocking his own overreaction. Seeing the senior suddenly burst out laughing, she pressed for the reason and unconsciously deployed a radiant smile to dispel the awkwardness. Eun-ah deployed a teasing tactic, bluntly stating that contrary to his somewhat intimidating appearance, he was actually an extremely delicate and thoughtful person. A brief pause was clearly visible on Gu-won's face. He silently looked deep into her eyes as if weighing that highly unexpected remark. In a mischievous chibi form, Gu-won deployed a hard press on her wound, making Eun-ah scream in pain, nonchalantly declaring that since she could still joke, the pain must be gone. He boldly reminded her to take good care of the wound so it wouldn't scab, then turned around to walk away, receiving a mumbled thank you from the sulking girl. However, Eun-ah suddenly deployed a holding back tactic as she hastily grabbed his wrist, shouting loudly to demand the senior hold off on leaving. His lips curled slightly into a meaningful smile. It seemed the young lady's bluntness had inadvertently touched a hidden corner of his soul. Eun-ah deployed a comforting tactic, softly reassuring the senior that he didn't need to mind too much about the recent incident. She started stammering an explanation that everything had its own reason and earnestly hoped he wouldn't develop any unwarranted misunderstandings. Gu-won indifferently declared he would pretend he never saw that day's events, then suddenly deployed an interrogation tactic about whether her ex-boyfriend was making things difficult for her. Eun-ah was utterly flustered, realizing he still remembered that image. She mumbled a thank you to hide the encompassing awkwardness. The senior's eyes suddenly became profound. He silently observed every smallest expression on the girl's face opposite him, as if searching for the truth. In an innocent chibi form, Eun-ah was dumbfounded hearing Gu-won firmly assert that she didn't need to waste effort giving any more excuses. He continued to strike another psychological blow, coldly declaring that if it were him, He would absolutely never accept getting back together with a traitor. A brief flash of annoyance was clearly visible on Gu-won's face, making Eun-ah silently lament in her heart that this senior truly possessed a highly conservative personality. She then gathered all her courage, hesitantly speaking up to clarify a highly sensitive issue she had been wondering about for so long. The atmosphere suddenly petrified as Eun-ah in her chibi form abruptly asked if the senior already had a daughter, because she noticed he exuded an aura identical to an exemplary father. From a hidden perspective, Gu-won's secret was suddenly exposed when Eun-ah cheered upon realizing he actually just had a younger sister instead of a daughter, like she always imagined. Park Ji-won stood crossing her arms with a cold sharpness in the middle of the street, her gaze drilling deep into the couple with extreme jealousy, looking ready to explode at her best friend's intimate display. The space suddenly transitioned to the inside of a luxurious room, where a commanding call pressing if she was listening rang out, shattering the silence. Eun-ah, in an elegant hanbok, deployed an apologetic tactic, awkwardly explaining that digging up the past at this moment was truly an utterly ridiculous thing to do. Ha-jin smirked slightly with a hidden meaning, boldly declaring that he had grasped all the thoughts and calculations his fake wife was trying to convey. Eun-ah's eyes wavered with a probing look. She then launched a counterattack with a pressing question to reconfirm what the guy opposite her just asserted. Ha-jin deployed an acting tactic, coldly demanding that both must pretend to be deeply in love in front of grandfather to dispel the suspicions about their current relationship. In an authoritarian chibi form, he ordered her to quickly stay quiet because he had already grasped the complete battle plan for the audience. Eun-ah's face suddenly flushed red from shyness, as she secretly complained about why grandfather was taking so much time to come out and greet the young couple. Ha-jin decisively grabbed his lapel, deploying a departure tactic, boldly declaring that if she was ready, both of them would officially begin this charade. Ha-jin suddenly paused, hurriedly deploying a grappling tactic as he tightly squeezed Eun-ah's hands and shouted loudly, asking if she was hurt anywhere. His face turned pale, anxious beads of sweat rolling down as he continuously pressed when the incident occurred and who was daring enough to lay a finger on her. He continued deploying a barrage of examination tactics, anxiously asking if she hurt anywhere else, causing a flustered Eun-ah to softly call out Ha-jin's name. Looking straight into her fake husband's eyes, she deployed a reassurance tactic, explaining that she merely suffered a pretty bad accidental fall. Eun-ah gave an awkward smile, reminding him that she was famous for being clumsy, then wondered why his attitude was so strange today. Ha-jin suddenly went silent, letting out a heavy sigh, as if he just realized his actions had crossed the line. He slowly loosened his embrace and deployed a retreat tactic, awkwardly dropping an apology for accidentally startling and panicking her. However, his hands lingered reluctantly. He hesitated, intending to say something more, but then stopped amidst the highly ambiguous atmosphere. With a slightly flushed face, Ha-jin boldly commanded that if she ever got hurt in the future, she must inform him immediately. At his urging to leave, Eun-ah absent-mindedly questioned his recent bizarre behavior and silently admitted he was making her heart extremely tense. Grandfather Han appeared with an extremely stern face, boldly declaring that he had told them not to come if they were truly too busy. Responding to that harsh attitude was Eun-ah's exhausted expression. She softly called out grandfather, as a way to soothe the tense atmosphere. In a hilarious chibi form, the old man cleared his throat, urging the young couple to quickly put on their shoes to prepare for the official meeting. Eun-ah immediately deployed a gluttonous tactic, excitedly asking if the nanny made bulgogi while Ha-jin could only freeze, looking at her with utterly exhausted eyes. The fake son-in-law suddenly became thoughtful, quietly observing the expressions of everyone around as if trying to find a loophole in this charade. His eyes suddenly met the sullen and vigilant expression of the nanny, who seemed to be secretly questioning the authenticity of their marriage. Ha-jin let out a heavy sigh, silently concluding that deceiving the close confidants in the family was truly an extremely difficult challenge. The nanny's eyes suddenly narrowed sharply. She silently scrutinized every minor detail on Ha-jin's face, as if wanting to strip bare all the secrets he was hiding. However, she suddenly turned around decisively and walked away, leaving behind an atmosphere full of skepticism and unresolved calculations. A fragrant and glistening piece of bulgogi beef appeared on the tip of the chopsticks, officially beginning a family meal full of dramatic undercurrents. Eun-ah deployed her enjoyment skill, her chibi face clearly showing satisfaction as she ravenously chewed on the delicious bulgogi meat. She continuously praised the food's perfection, making the family dinner atmosphere in the old house extremely lively. Under the peaceful hammock porch, the tranquility of the scenery seemed to hide dramatic undercurrents about to erupt. On the wooden tea table, the porcelain tea set and the plate of jam cakes were exquisitely arranged, opening for the grandfather's powerful calling of Ju Hajin's name. Grandpa Han gave a slight nod, deploying his observation skill, seemingly silently evaluating the changes in his grandson-in-law after their time living together. Black and white stones began appearing on the go board, marking a dramatic battle of wits to discover the couple's secrets. The old man smiled kindly, but his eyes were extremely sharp, gently pressing to ask if their actual married life was doing well or not. Hajin smirked, deploying his countering skill, casually remarking that his granddaughter was never an easy person to manage or pamper. His eyes suddenly narrowed, full of thoughts, silently affirming a cruel reality that still seemed to be hidden behind that calm exterior. A hand decisively placed a black stone on the board, accompanied by a heavy inquiry about whether he truly intended to hide the truth from Eun-ah forever. Grandpa Han slightly bowed his head and sighed, silently acknowledging that his precious granddaughter would definitely have to endure many hardships in the face of upcoming upheavals. In his chibi form by the go board, the old man confessed that it was precisely out of a lifetime of worry for Eun-ah that he decided to place Hajin by her side. His lips slightly curled into a gentle smile, calmly admitting that wishing for him to protect her was perhaps just the final selfishness of an old man. With a face glowing with contentment, Grandpa Han expressed deep gratitude because at least he still had one single thing to feel reassured about. The happy image of a small family suddenly flashed back like an old film reel, recalling a priceless treasure they were both preserving together. Responding to that expectation was Hajin's unwavering gaze, as he boldly asserted that he was always ready to be a sturdy shield to protect her. Grandpa Han then deployed his reminding skill, sternly demanding the fake son-in-law to fully keep his past promise even if he had to face any adversity. The bandage on Hajin's face evoked memories of a turbulent past when he once bitterly rejected a heavily weighted proposition. In a simple hoodie, Hajin bitterly admitted that Eun-ah would never accept this marriage and believed that the grandfather already understood too well the reason he had to leave. His hands clenched tightly, full of thoughts, silently muttering that he could only guess the situation through her way of life rather than grasp the whole truth hidden behind it. Hajin worried about the fierce opposition Eun-ah had to bear and reminded him that her aunt was now a powerful executive board member. In response to that anxiety, Grandpa Han gave a slight smile and deployed his confessing skill about the biggest regret in the life of a corporate head. He recounted that he once took in the child of a distant relative after her parents passed away, but now that woman had developed a blind greed for the company. The image of a young, innocent Eun-ah calling out to her aunt flashed back as proof of the cruel betrayal by the one she always trusted. The old man determined that because he was still alive, that aunt always considered his only granddaughter a thorn in her side that needed removing to monopolize the succession. Grandpa Han's face hardened as he affirmed that the Hanel Group was not a small organization to be easily manipulated. Looking at the fashion sketches, he expressed his final wish to protect Eun-ah so she could freely develop the design brand she always dreamed of. Hajin deployed his agonizing inquiry skill as he bluntly asked if he truly trusted someone who had ruthlessly abandoned and broken Eun-ah's heart like him. Grandpa Han slowly turned his back, calmly philosophizing that when people step onto the other side of life's slope, all the most sincere emotions only begin to reveal themselves. Despite Hajin's intention to utter an apology, the old man unleashed his ultimate skill, boldly declaring that he only had a single year left to live. Grandpa Han shockingly revealed the grim news that he only had a maximum of 1 year left to live and earnestly begged Hajin to protect Eun-ah at all costs. Returning to his modern appearance, Hajin slightly smirked and boldly announced that it was time for him to head back to the apartment. Eun-ah deployed her clinging skill as she hugged her relative tightly, sobbing and screaming that she absolutely didn't want to leave her family's embrace. In her demanding chibi form, She cried while dreaming of a royal life, where there would be people serving her every need without her lifting a finger. Hajin slightly reached out and deployed his comforting skill, gently touching Eun-ah's hand as a silent reminder of reality. Grandpa Han smiled contentedly and deployed his entrusting skill, boldly declaring that his granddaughter's entire safety was now placed solely on him. The fake son-in-law slightly looked back with a confident gaze, decisively making a commitment to excellently fulfill the heavy responsibility entrusted to him. He then deployed his lifting skill to carry his fake wife toward the waiting car, ignoring Eun-ah, who was still nonstop grumbling about the obsession of having to take out the trash. In a hilarious chibi form, Hajin coaxed that he would cover all the cleaning for the next 2 weeks, making the grandparents wave after them with deep emotion. Watching the young couple's backs slowly fade away, Grandpa Han silently turned back into the house with a heavy heart about the loneliness that was about to envelop the space. The room's space suddenly became silent, leaving only stacks of old cardboard boxes piled upon each other on the row of cold iron cabinets. Gu-won lay sprawled on the white mattress with a tired face, one arm resting behind his neck, as if trying to chase away his tangled thoughts. His eyes suddenly became sluggish and lifeless, silently sighing at the emptiness engulfing his entire mind. The senior then sat bolt upright and deployed his head-scratching skill, letting out a heavy sigh while taking off his baseball cap. He silently blamed himself for why he had spouted such cheesy lectures about traitors, making him feel extremely embarrassed now upon recalling it. In Gu-won's mind, Eun-ah appeared like a clumsy and unreliable little puppy, especially after her series of incredibly silly stumbling achievements. The quiet atmosphere was suddenly shattered by the continuous ringing of the phone, signaling an incoming call that interrupted his endless stream of thoughts. An adorable little girl with round eyes deployed her cheering skill, eagerly calling her brother through the phone screen with excitement. That was Gu-eun, his 6-year-old kindergarten sister, excitedly confirming with someone that her brother had finally picked up the phone. Gu-won then softened his voice and deployed his coaxing skill, promising to visit this weekend and not forgetting to bring a teeny pink doll as a gift for her. Gu-won silently noted the irony that both of them possessed the exact same name, his hand lightly scratching the back of his neck in embarrassment. In his nonchalant chibi form, he consoled himself that they wouldn't have a chance to cross paths again anyway, so it was no longer important. The door suddenly swung open along with a female student's radiant smile as she excitedly deployed her inviting skill for her senior to quickly step inside. The student lounge space appeared bustling, where the senior continuously encouraged Gu-won to feel free to drop by whenever he wanted. Just as she finished speaking, the upperclassman directed her gaze toward the juniors standing nearby and deployed a very intimate call to attract their attention. A long, slender hand gently reached out, deploying its probing skill, as inquiries about whether the freshman bought snacks for the whole group rang out with curiosity. The girl with braided hair deployed an apologetic smile, explaining that she was just worried because of Eun-ah's rude attitude the other day, so she bought gifts to apologize. Park Ji-won shockingly deployed her inquiry skill, continuously questioning whether the previous bad rumors were actually true. The other person immediately gave a firm confirmation, making Ji-won in her chibi form awkwardly admit she once thought they were just exaggerations. The seniors then deployed their attacking skill, coldly criticizing Eun-ah's rudeness and mocking the fact that she always covered herself in designer brands just to show off. The seniors in the student lounge deployed their mocking skill, endlessly gossiping about Eun-ah relying on being a rich young lady to look down on others. Ji-won then deployed her farewell skill, politely saying goodbye to go to her part-time job, which made the senior somewhat surprised by this rush. She quickly walked away after leaving the apology snack bag, receiving a message to get home safely from the people who were showing satisfied expressions. A female student deployed a scrutinizing gaze, watching Ji-won's back, silently noting that contrary to the unpleasant friend Eun-ah, this girl was very kind. The person opposite then launched an attack while looking at her phone, coldly affirming that whether one has money or not, childhood upbringing is still the most important thing. The whole group dissected Eun-ah's interview clip together, where she was pretending to be friendly while sharing her shopping habits, leaving them with nothing but contempt. They continued to deploy their nitpicking skill, asserting that all of her answers about her claustrophobia were just prearranged lies. A senior smiled with dark and calculating intent, she suddenly suggested the whole group participate in a dramatic prank to test the young lady. Sitting silently in the corner of the room, Gu-won deployed a reckless, romantic exterior, seemingly not paying any attention to the crowd's gossiping. His eyes suddenly became sharp and profound, silently judging the absurdity of those who were trying to plot and scheme right before his eyes. The next morning, the quiet atmosphere at the luxury apartment building was suddenly torn apart by the young Mrs. echoing scream of pain. Eun-ah grimaced and deployed her blowing skill to ease the stinging, resentfully accusing her fake husband of intentionally using too much force. Hajin calmly deployed his sterilizing skill, coldly demanding her to try to endure while his hands meticulously finished the job. Sitting dejectedly on the sofa with a bandage on her knee, Eun-ah in her chibi form sniffled, saying she originally intended to wait until school to handle it. Hajin immediately launched a counterattack, pressing to ask if anyone at school would volunteer to do these things for her, instead of letting him do it. Eun-ah then deployed her justifying skill, awkwardly listing Ji-won and Chiron's names as a way to protect her own self-esteem. The fake son-in-law boldly reminded her to be absolutely careful until she was completely healed, and didn't forget to tell her to contact him immediately if she ran into trouble. He then deployed his leaving skill, decisively pushing the apartment door and casually announcing that he would head out first. Hajin slightly bowed his head, deploying his observation skill, his pensive gaze looking down as if waiting for something that was about to happen. The elevator door suddenly opened, accompanied by an announcement, making him silently surprised at its unexpected swiftness at this moment. Gu-won stood waiting in front of the elevator doors, accidentally encountering the tall back of Hajin approaching. The renowned senior deployed an indifferent gaze, casually observing the stranger who had just appeared next to him. Gu-won slightly bowed his head in thought, silently recalling the times he accidentally ran into Eun-ah in this very cramped space. He sighed slightly with regret upon realizing that meeting the beautiful young lady again seemed to be nowhere near as easy as he thought. The atmosphere inside the elevator suddenly became stifling when Hajin deployed his glancing skill, with full vigilance, toward the supermodel guy. The fake son-in-law narrowed his eyes in doubt, silently asking himself whether he had seen this face at school before or not. The elevator doors suddenly swung open. Hajin made up his mind that he would have to question Eun-ah about the true identity of the mysterious neighbor guy. He slightly pursed his lips in tension, trying to keep a calm facade, so as not to alert the other party right at this sensitive moment. Stepping out of the elevator with a sullen face, Hajin silently prepared for a dramatic interrogation that was about to take place at home. Memories from a few days ago suddenly rushed back, when Hajin deployed his dark smile and cornered Eun-ah against the door to interrogate the grand young Mrs. Coming and Going hours. Eun-ah deployed her beating around the bush skill, her panicked face explaining that she had no other way and silently fearing she would be caught red-handed if she made a slip. She gave the excuse that the freshman orientation ended late, while her hands covered in bandages continuously twisted together in total awkwardness. Responding to that excuse was Hajin's cold gaze. He boldly declared that he wouldn't mind at all if she wanted to push him out of her life. He pressed her against the wall and asserted that if she deliberately came home late just to avoid him, then say it straight, because he himself would be the one to proactively yield the space. In her resentful chibi form, Eun-ah muttered sarcastically about her fake husband's sudden obedient attitude and tried to appear nonchalant even though her heart was churning. The young lady deployed her shooing skill, tiredly demanding him to quickly get out of the way so she could enter her room to rest after an exhaustingly long day. Hajin sighed heavily, his sluggish eyes clearly showing extreme fatigue, while his mouth nonstop mumbled complaints about his own terrible condition. Suddenly stepping past the strange guy in the hallway, Hajin abruptly halted as he deployed his olfactory skill, silently recognizing the distinct smell of a cigarette that had just drifted by. He slightly scratched his neck full of skepticism, silently raising a big question mark whether encountering this exact same rare cigarette type was truly just a random coincidence. The classroom sank into a mysterious silence, signaling dramatic undercurrents about to erupt right in this very school. The class ended when the female instructor smiled and announced that today's lesson was over. Suddenly, she spoke up and asked Chae Eun-ah to stay behind for a moment, making the girl slightly surprised. While the instructor kindly inquired about Chairman Han's health, The surrounding students deployed their whispering skill full of sarcasm about the favoritism for the Chaebol class. Park Ji-won sat quietly observing the situation with a thoughtful gaze, seemingly silently analyzing the streams of pressure surrounding her friend. Having just escaped the encirclement, Eun-ah immediately received concerned inquiries from her group of friends about whether she got home safely last night. The smartphone lay silently on the table as if waiting for secret information about to be revealed. A slender hand quickly deployed a grabbing skill on the device, retrieving the important means of communication amidst the noisy classroom space. The scene shifted to the cozy atmosphere at Daily Coffee, where modern coffee machines were operating at full capacity to serve customers. Ji-won couldn't hide her curiosity and deployed her questioning skill, pressing to see what the instructor actually said in private. Eun-ah just gave a casual smile and deployed her hand-waving skill, calmly explaining that it was just normal socializing because her grandfather knew the instructor's parents. Ji-won frowned slightly and deployed her analyzing skill, concluding that the instructor was famous for never socializing with students and marveled at the massive influence of the Hanol group. Eun-ah in her chibi form sighed exhaustingly, confessing that she felt suffocated and truly hated being overly noticed by everyone. While chatting, the young lady suddenly remembered she needed to contact her grandfather urgently, so she hurriedly checked her personal bag. She began frantically deploying her bag rummaging skill, leaving her friends frozen and watching with fed-up expressions. Eun-ah's face suddenly turned gloomy and devastated as she shockingly announced that her precious phone seemed to be lost. Before the suggestion to return to the lecture hall to search, she deployed her favor-asking skill, hoping her friend would try calling her personal number. The young lady's eyes suddenly widened in vigilance as she seemingly silently listened to important clues about the device's location. Eun-ah beamed with joy upon hearing from the department's group chat that her phone was in the storage room on the same floor as the student lounge. She immediately deployed her leaving skill and flatly refused her friend's help, thinking that getting her phone back was extremely simple. The atmosphere suddenly became silent as the scene focused on the storage room sign, signaling a dramatic encounter about to take place. Eun-ah's ankle boots paused slightly at the doorway as she secretly wondered if this was where her device was kept. Noticing the door was unlocked, the young lady deployed her observing skill through the crack, then muttered softly that the entrance was wide open. Cautiously stepping into the pitch-black space inside, she suddenly shivered upon feeling the gloomy atmosphere enveloping the storage room. Her slender hands continuously deployed the light switch-pressing skill, but the only response to that effort was silence, making her shockingly realize the lights wouldn't turn on. Eun-ah's face suddenly turned ashen as she silently regretted that she should have gone with her friends instead of venturing into this lonely place. While she was struggling, a continuous vibrating sound suddenly rang out, making the young lady's eyes wide open in astonishment. Thinking it was help from the outside, she boldly called out Ji-won's name as a way to calm her wavering spirit. The phone lying silently on the shelf suddenly became the center of attention as it continuously vibrated to signal an incoming call. Eun-ah quickly deployed her phone answering skill and eagerly greeted the other end of the line, as if she had just found a savior. The door slightly creaked open, accompanied by Eun-ah's excited announcement that she had finally found her phone right here. Eun-ah was joyfully announcing the good news when the ominous sound of the door slamming shut echoed, cutting off her words. She shockingly turned back to look at the tightly locked door, leaving her all alone in the encompassing darkness of the storage room. Out in the hallway, her friend Chae Eun, with an uneasy expression, deployed her probing skill, pressing to see if this plan was really okay. Responding to that worry was the indifferent attitude of the senior Hein. She calmly asserted that everything was still under control. Hein coldly recalled previous incidents of being accidentally locked in as a perfect excuse to cover up her malicious scheme. She smugly listed a series of reasons from broken lights to a jammed door to push the young miss into a corner, without anyone suspecting. Seeing the junior still intending to speak up to stop her, the senior deployed her suppressing skill with a sharp glare that forced the other to fall silent. She sarcastically remarked that with a phone in hand, Eun-ah would surely find a way to escape on her own and not be in any danger. Looking at her subordinate's blushing expression of embarrassment, Hein seemed even more smug about the drama she had just painstakingly orchestrated. She coldly ordered her friend to immediately drop that buzz-killing anxious face and focus on enjoying the fruits of this prank. Eun-ah's face turned pale with sheer terror, Her breathing became rapid as she realized she was trapped in the cold darkness. The panic caused horrific memories of the past to rush back, the image of a lonely child sobbing out hopeless apologies. Her hands trembled violently, making the phone slip out of her control and fall straight onto the floor like an omen of impending disaster. The young lady stood frozen amidst the dark space, her entire body continuously shivering from the ghosts of the past haunting her mind. The desperate cry for salvation from her childhood self resurfaced as proof of a soul scar that had never fully healed. The whole world seemed turned upside down as she deployed her screaming for help skill echoing throughout the room, dragging herself into an abyss of despair. She softly uttered words of denial in choked breaths, trying to push back the psychological phantom waiting to swallow the last bit of her remaining sanity. Reassuring herself that it was no big deal, the young lady shakily reached out to deploy her searching for the phone skill to cling to reality. Clutching the device in her hand like a final life preserver, she made up her mind that she would definitely find a way out of this place. Her eyes wandered amidst the dark night, while the pounding of her heart served as a reminder of the extreme terror currently present. Amidst the encroaching darkness, a deep, warm voice calling Eun-ah's name suddenly rang out, making her shockingly turn her gaze toward the door panel. In a hallucination, the young lady softly uttered a choked cry for her father as if anticipating salvation from the deceased. The image of her gently smiling father appeared in her mind like a warm halo, softly calling out his beloved little girl Eun-ah's name. Her father tenderly asked if she was angry because he came to pick her up too late, making the child Eun-ah of the past sob in extreme self-pity. But reality suddenly became chaotic as a mysterious dark figure wearing a mask appeared like a reminder of that final journey of no return. Amidst the desperate screams, a thunderous kick suddenly smashed the storage room door to pieces, chasing away the ghost of the past that was about to swallow her. Ju Hajin rushed in like a guardian deity. He loudly called out Eun-ah's name with a face clearly showing panic upon witnessing her terrible state. Without a second of hesitation, the fake son-in-law deployed his shielding skill as he hurriedly reached out his arms to embrace the girl cowering in fear. The warmth from his hands instantly pulled her out of the abyss of loneliness, soothing her heartbeats racing wildly from the psychological trauma. The sunlight from outside poured into the dark room like proof that Hajin's presence had truly brought Eun-ah back to a safe reality. Eun-ah sobbed, tightly hugging Hajin in the dark room, his warmth suddenly becoming the only medicine to soothe her shattered soul. Meanwhile, in another corner of the campus, an astonishing inquiry rang out, signaling a tense confrontation about to break out. Gu-won deployed a sharp gaze, boldly ordering Senior Hein to immediately put an end to the filthy plan she was attempting to carry out. She then deployed her playing dumb skill, pretending not to understand and repeatedly pressing to see what the supermodel guy was actually implying. Patience suddenly vanishing, Gu-won uttered a powerful call to intimidate the other party in the face of her attitude of deliberately dodging the truth. Staring straight into Hein's turning pale face, he asked with heavy pressure whether he looked like he was joking around with her or not. He coldly turned his back, deployed his smoke-exhaling skill, and asserted that if she remained determined to play dumb to the end, he would have nothing left to say. Gu-won continued to launch a psychological attack as he sarcastically asked if she felt ashamed to be a college student yet still behave in such a despicable manner. His eyes suddenly became profound, silently determining that if he hadn't known about this scheme, that would have been a different story. But now that everything was clear, he bluntly declared that having to be a bystander watching her commit evil made him feel utterly disgusted. Gu-won decisively deployed his cigarette-stubbing skill, while coldly warning Senior Hein that it was best not to make things more difficult for each other. He directed a sharp gaze toward the other party and boldly questioned whether she had truly engraved what he just said into her mind. In the face of the supermodel guy's dominance, Hein could only stay silent, deploying her gaze-avoiding skill while her mind was extremely wavering. She hastily spoke up to affirm that she clearly understood his intentions, then immediately turned away to escape this suffocating atmosphere. Looking at her retreating back, Gu-won silently concluded that the other party had probably gotten the message and hoped she wouldn't continue her stupid actions. Even though Hein walked away with a deeply resentful face, secretly mocking that the young lady certainly couldn't be so stupid as to be unable to find a way out. Back in the storage room space, Hajin's hands gently patted Eun-ah's back as a way to deploy his spirit-calming skill. He tenderly pulled the trembling girl into his arms, silently feeling heartbroken upon witnessing her severely devastated state at this moment. Amidst the choked sobs, Hajin worriedly asked if she was hurt anywhere, making Eun-ah just bury her head in his chest seeking shelter. The young lady then deployed her choking up skill as she pressed to ask by what miraculous way he knew she was in danger to come to the rescue in time. Hajin calmly explained that he was just accidentally passing by this lecture hall area when he suddenly ran into a group of friends frantically searching in sheer panic. He then deployed his probing skill while standing before the panicked friends to grasp the situation. He boldly recounted that everyone was extremely worried when her phone signal was suddenly cut off midway. While her chibi friends were still busily climbing the hill searching, he advised Eun-ah not to be too upset over the recent incident. The young lady's eyes wavered slightly, containing a sense of shock mixed with sorrow as she looked deep into the other party's soul. She choked up, deploying her tight-hugging skill on him, and resentfully asked why fate always let him appear during her weakest moments. Hajin looked at her deeply while Eun-ah silently wondered why he always did so well that she couldn't bring herself to be heartless enough to hate him anymore. In response to that weakness, he gently comforted her and secretly wished if only she could love him madly like in the beginning. Amidst the empty room, Hajin tightened his embrace, deploying his protecting skill until all the long-suppressed emotions burst out and could no longer be hidden. Hajin tightened his hug, silently wishing that if only Eun-ah also harbored feelings for him as deeply and madly as he did right now. His eyes suddenly became melancholic and quiet, seemingly immersed in highly complex thoughts about their relationship. He then deployed his confessing skill while clutching her lapel, admitting that he himself had once struggled extremely miserably with these flutters. His hands slightly tightened their grip on the hem of her skirt. Hajin silently asked himself whether stubbornly staying by her side was truly hurting the girl he loved or not. Burying his head into Eun-ah's shoulder, he boldly declared a selfish truth that he actually liked the feeling of seeing her heartbroken because of him. Hajin's confession of wanting to see her made Eun-ah's eyes instantly tremble, astonishment clearly visible in her stunned gaze. He then deployed his skill of tightening his arms around her waist, calmly expressing his desire to embrace and completely possess this small figure. Hajin's hands suddenly moved up to her collar, and he coldly declared that as long as she gave the slightest excuse, he wouldn't hold back anymore. Eun-ah completely collapsed before this powerful psychological attack, her face blushing bright red while her whole body shivered slightly with emotion. The young lady deployed her skill of extreme embarrassment, only able to stand still and endure under the burning, pressure-filled gaze of her hateful fake husband. Hajin held Eun-ah tightly in his arms, his eyes showing intense passion as he confessed that he truly wanted to lose his mind and act on instinct. His hands gently gripped the hem of her shirt, boldly declaring that these were the truest feelings he had buried for so long. He firmly asserted that he would put an end to his cowardly thoughts of leaving just to wish her happiness. Hajin shot a sharp glare, swearing that whether it was hatred or pain, he would hold on to everything so he could rightfully stay by her side. Outside in the hallway, Ji-won started complaining, frustratedly wondering why every building on campus was located on steep hills. Her companion's exclamation of shock suddenly shattered the quiet atmosphere of the empty lecture hall. Eun-ah quietly stepped out with Hajin's coat over her shoulders, trying to hide the shock still evident on her face. Facing her friends' worries, the young lady calmly reassured them, explaining that she was just stuck because of a broken door. Hajin stood quietly beside her and thoughtfully noted that they both had truly been through a very exhausting and troublesome day. Seeing that her friend was okay, Ji-won breathed a sigh of relief and told herself how lucky it was that she bumped into Hajin while looking for her. Hajin stood in silence with a deeply thoughtful expression, as if his recent confession had started to stir up a storm in his heart. Noticing the clear confusion on her friend's face, Ji-won excused herself to leave and received a nod from Eun-ah. The young lady's eyes grew heavy as she gazed into the distance, silently wondering if she truly understood everything that was happening. Eun-ah wore a deeply sorrowful and melancholic expression, seemingly unable to escape the mess of emotions that had just burst out. Meanwhile, Hajin let out an exhausted sigh and rubbed the back of his neck as a way to relieve the psychological pressure. The young lady looked up in shock with wide eyes, as if she had just realized some earth-shattering truth. The scene of the classroom appeared incredibly still under the brilliant morning sunlight, marking the beginning of a new day full of promises. Eun-ah stood closely against the wooden door with an anxious look, her hands constantly twisting together as if to hide her hesitation. She then cautiously probed, wondering whether Ju Hajin was still fast asleep or had already woken up. Her slender hands finally gripped the doorknob and decisively turned it, ready for a dramatic confrontation inside. Eun-ah in her chibi form hid behind the door with a grumpy face, muttering complaints about how Hajin always made her worry endlessly. Hajin coldly appeared and asked who exactly she was paying such special attention to. The young lady played dumb, saying she should go back to sleep, but he instantly exposed her sneaky attempt to sneak out and avoid him. The fake husband boldly declared that he didn't care if she left, but firmly handed her a white cup, demanding she drink it all before going. Eun-ah widened her eyes in stunned disbelief as Hajin brought the medicine cup right up to her face with a resolute attitude that allowed no refusal. After reluctantly finishing it, she indignantly asked if he was satisfied and coldly demanded he get out of her way so she could leave immediately. However, the terrible bitterness suddenly spread, making Eun-ah grimace and complain that its taste was absolutely awful. She pinched her nose while complaining about the strange smell, while Hajin calmly explained it was herbal medicine he had gone out of his way to bring back from his nanny for her. Seeing her misery, Hajin coaxed her by offering a sweet yellow candy resting in his palm to soothe the bitterness. Eun-ah suspiciously asked if this candy was also from his nanny, quietly admitting that with a little sweetness, she felt much better. Hajin gave a meaningful smile, mentioning that this was no big deal, but it still made the atmosphere suddenly suffocating. Eun-ah showed a clueless face with a question mark popping up over her head, secretly wondering what this fake husband was scheming. Unexpectedly, Hajin stepped closer and tilted her chin up, casually teasing her by asking if she thought he was deliberately flirting with her. Immediately, the young lady screamed a fierce rejection, demanding he quickly move out of the way so she could escape this dangerously close approach. Eun-ah frustratingly stomped her feet, insisting she would take out the trash herself rather than accept such weird and possessive help from him. Hajin brought up the past, reminding her that she was the one who used to constantly nag and make him do all the heavy chores in the house. He smirked sarcastically, asserting that Eun-ah fundamentally hated chores, so this sudden action looked ridiculous and completely unlike her. In her chibi form looking utterly defeated with dark lines down her face, the young lady was shocked to hear him boldly announce that from now on, he would handle all the household chores. Eun-ah awkwardly watched Hajin's approaching steps and pressed for the reason behind this drastic change, only to receive a firm confirmation that he was indeed flirting with her. With a face flushed red from embarrassment, she screamed for him to shut up, while Hajin flashed a dark smile, telling her that if she hated housework, she could freely use this husband of hers. Eun-ah in her chibi form angrily threw a rapid series of punches at Hajin's chest, boldly declaring she would handle everything herself and demanding he move out of the way. She grimaced, complaining about her fake husband's rock-hard body that made her small hands start to ache, while Hajin stood perfectly still in defiance. Suddenly, the young lady froze, her eyes widening in astonishment as if she had just discovered something earth-shattering right in front of her. Hajin provocatively lifted the hem of his shirt to reveal his defined abs, asking if his wife truly liked this kind of blatant flirting. Witnessing such an overly seductive physical beauty, Eun-ah's eyes suddenly lit up with infatuation, leaving her mind completely captivated by his perfect abs. Unable to contain her curiosity, the young lady reached out possessively to firmly touch his scorching, hot abdominal muscles. In a hilarious chibi form, Eun-ah continued to blissfully enjoy the strange sensation on her hands, leaving Hajin standing frozen with a giant question mark above his head due to this sudden boldness. Jolted awake from her daze, her face flushed red as she yelled that she was leaving immediately and told him to go ahead and take out that pile of trash by himself. Watching his wife's fleeing figure, Chibi Hajin just stood blankly scratching his head in utter bewilderment, unable to understand the young lady's train of thought. The scene suddenly shifted to the Hankook University newspaper office, where new troubles were about to be exposed behind the office nameplate. Eun-ah smiled brightly, thanking the female newspaper reporter who expressed her gratitude for Eun-ah agreeing to participate in this rare interview. The reporter gently reminded the young lady to be a bit more patient, as another student from the same department would be joining the interview shortly. Waiting alone by the bulletin board, Eun-ah sighed heavily, silently blaming Ju Ha-jin for making her mind so messed up right from the early morning. Her eyes showed a hint of melancholy, as if she were lost in a stream of memories about the passionate confessions from her detestable fake husband. Memories suddenly rushed back of Ha-jin holding her tightly and boldly, declaring that he would end his cowardly thought of leaving just to wish her simple happiness. He coldly asserted that whether it was hatred or pain, he would keep it all so he could rightfully stay by her side forever. Snapped back to reality, Eun-ah's face immediately flushed red with embarrassment as her heart raced uncontrollably at his overwhelming possessiveness. In her hilarious chibi form, she panicked and desperately tried to dispel the thoughts, screaming at herself to immediately stop overthinking it. The young lady's gaze suddenly turned deep and thoughtful as she told herself that the current outcome seemed to be going way further than she had ever imagined. Suddenly, Senior Gu-won appeared beside her, casually remarking that his previous advice probably hadn't helped her current terrible state at all. Eun-ah, in her chibi form, frantically called out to her senior, pressing him about what Gu-won was actually doing at the university newspaper office. Answering that astonishment was the appearance of the female reporter, who cheerfully exclaimed her joy that the famous supermodel had agreed to a rushed interview. The young lady suddenly remembered that the editorial's theme was about fashion and social media, silently concluding that Gu-won's presence was entirely obvious. Just as she was about to enter the waiting room, a firm hand suddenly grabbed Eun-ah's arm, making her freeze in shock. Gu-won casually informed everyone that he and his junior would go buy coffee, ignoring Eun-ah, who was staring at him in stunned disbelief. In a resigned chibi form, the young lady could only trudge along behind him after he boldly ordered her to go with him immediately. She grumbled under her breath, silently admitting to herself that she actually had absolutely no interest in coffee right now. The scene suddenly shifted to a kitchen filled with shelves, where a powerful call of Ju Ha-jin's name shattered the working atmosphere. Ha-jin, with a rugged look in a backward baseball cap, confidently answered the boss, officially appearing in his role as a diligent part-time employee. The shop owner reminded him to take his time working, only to receive Ha-jin's assurance that he was still pacing his rests reasonably. The shop owner smiled in satisfaction and praised him, saying Ha-jin was really hardworking, quite unlike the lazy youths of today. Ha-jin paused with a highly skeptical look when the boss suddenly called out, inviting a mysterious person to quickly step inside. In a completely clueless chibi form, he quietly watched as the boss brought up how he had previously mentioned this new partner. It was the girl who had just joined the staff starting today, standing at the doorway with an incredibly pretty appearance. The shop owner tried to play matchmaker, excitedly noting that the two must surely be perfectly compatible classmates, while also instructing Ha-jin to thoroughly pass on his experience, because the store was facing a severe staff shortage tonight. The scene shifted to Gu-won handing a can of soda to Eun-ah to ease the tense atmosphere after the interview. He casually threw a psychological punch by pressing her on whether she was actually starting to get back with that ex-boyfriend of hers. Eun-ah immediately issued a fierce denial, boldly asserting that there was absolutely no reconciliation between her and Ha-jin. Facing her explanation that this was just a simple truce, Gu-won in his chibi form could only sigh silently with a nonchalant attitude. Eun-ah sat across from Gu-won, softly confessing that even though she hadn't truly forgiven him, since they went to the same school, they should try to coexist peacefully. Gu-won slightly narrowed his eyes at her, secretly breathing a sigh of relief that things seemed fine, even though he had no intention of putting too much trust in this girl. The young lady's eyes suddenly wavered. She blamed herself for being so nosy and overly concerned with her senior's attitude. Eun-ah gathered all her courage to speak, hastily clarifying that the story she was about to tell was entirely not hers, but about an anonymous friend. She talked about a friend who was incredibly confused upon meeting her ex-boyfriend again, her heart still fluttering, yet the pain from the past breakup made her afraid. Looking up at Gu-won with a deeply expectant face, Eun-ah boldly asked what advice he would give to the poor girl in that story. His eyes suddenly became profound as he calmly answered that he would definitely advise her to bravely confront her ex once more. Eun-ah let out an astonished gasp, repeatedly pressing him on why he changed his tune so quickly when he previously advised her not to hold on. The space instantly fell silent as Gu-won stared deeply into his soda can, unexpectedly asking back why people can rarely forget their first love. He casually remarked that we always remember things left deeply unresolved much more than those that have fully concluded, just like an unfinished book or a movie cut off halfway. Gu-won reasoned that if an ex from the past still carries a far greater attraction than the new things at college, it proves that the bond hasn't truly ended. He firmly assured Eun-ah that she absolutely couldn't just ignore these rising feelings and move on so easily. The image of a lonely Eun-ah flashed back as a warning that she would be imprisoned in those unresolved memories for the rest of her life if she didn't face them. Before the stunned young lady, the senior changed his tone and proposed a completely different course of action. He advised her that whatever the reason for their past breakup, the best way right now is to just bravely meet that man again. The purpose of this is for both of them to see each other at their absolute worst, shaking off all illusions and accepting the harsh reality. Gu-won suddenly reached out to lift Eun-ah's chin, boldly declaring that only this reunion could bring a true closure for both of them. Eun-ah was left entirely dead silent by this daringly close approach, her eyes wide with bewilderment as she felt his breath so close. In response to that confusion was Gu-won's incredibly deep and sharp gaze, as if he wanted to use his coldness to awaken her rationality. The scene closed with the supermodel's high-pressure glare aimed straight into her soul, signaling a massive shift in the young lady's mindset. Gu-won looked at Eun-ah and asked her to relay those words to her anonymous friend. Eun-ah, in her chibi form, awkwardly announced that she was ready and urged her senior to set off quickly. Right at this moment, Gu-won unexpectedly received a phone call. He gave a highly meaningful smile and asked for her permission to take the call for a moment. The senior began a highly mysterious conversation, casually mentioning that he was currently in the storage room area of XX neighborhood. With a pensive face, Gu-won coldly explained to the person on the other end of the line that he didn't intentionally break the door, but merely got accidentally trapped inside. Meanwhile, Ha-jin quietly stood in a corner with sorrowful eyes, as if he were carrying heavy thoughts that were hard to share. The new female employee then spoke up to refuse his help because she didn't want to become a burden that would make Ha-jin worry. Night fell on the bustling neighborhood. The restaurant owner smiled with satisfaction, announcing that both of them had worked hard and allowed them to get off work. Ha-jin slightly smiled in response to the owner's greeting, officially concluding an exhausting workday at the restaurant. Seeing that it was getting late, the chibi owner then suggested that it would be great if Ha-jin could personally escort his co-worker Ji-won home safely. Ha-jin firmly accepted the restaurant owner's suggestion, asserting that he would definitely escort his co-worker home safely. The owner smiled with complete satisfaction and waved goodbye, secretly hoping for a good bond between his two diligent employees. On the way back under the dim streetlights, Ji-won hesitantly expressed her regret for having a slip of the tongue that made him feel restricted while living so close to the restaurant. Ha-jin nonchalantly texted his wife to report that he was off work while affirming that this distance was actually not far at all. Seeing Ha-jin smile while reading the furious text message from Eun-ah, Ji-won curiously observed his unusually radiant expression at this moment. She then spoke up to interrogate whether the person making him constantly smile and talk through the phone screen was his lover. Without a bit of hesitation, the young man firmly confirmed the existence of his girlfriend, leaving the other person completely stunned in silence out of surprise. Ji-won suppressed a sigh, confessing that because she didn't see a couple ring, she had mistakenly thought their relationship had come to an end. Ha-jin unexpectedly pulled out the necklace hidden under his shirt to reveal the sparkling ring, casually explaining that he just didn't want the keepsake to get damaged. Despite Ji-won forcing a smile to praise that cherishing, Ha-jin suddenly slowed his pace, turned around and firmly announced that he had something important to ask her. Ha-jin coldly suggested that Ji-won should proactively look for a part-time job somewhere else instead of continuing to work with him. The excessively abrupt request made Ji-won astounded. She stopped dead in the middle of the street and could only blurt out a highly shocked question. She looked straight at him and frankly criticized that saying such harsh words right at this moment was actually incredibly rude. Despite that resistance, Ha-jin still decisively demanded her to find a new workplace because he believed it would make both of their lives easier. Ji-won started to get angry. She fired back that there was fundamentally nothing shady between them and she didn't understand why she had to quit her job just because of his girlfriend's existence. Ha-jin nonchalantly turned away and explained that her leaving the restaurant would help him easily and completely ignore her presence. He affirmed that he didn't like mixing work with friends, while simultaneously emphasizing that his girlfriend would definitely feel bothered about this matter. Not stopping there, he continued to put the other in her place by coldly reminding her that right from the start, they were fundamentally not close at all. Giving a highly indifferent smile, the young man firmly declared that he genuinely felt satisfied having poured out all the thoughts in his heart. He ended the conversation by affirming that he only escorted her home to say this, and reminded her that there was no shortage of other jobs out there for her. Eun-ah decisively announced she was leaving, abandoning the awkward atmosphere after the highly meaningful conversation. Right after that, Ji-won firmly called out to pull Hajin back when she saw him about to nonchalantly turn his back and walk on like a stranger. With a face clearly showing anger, the young lady resentfully questioned how he could act as if there had never been any connection between the two of them. Ji-won unexpectedly dropped a shocking statement by asserting that the real reason Hajin ruthlessly left Eun-ah back in the day was actually because of her. Responding to that agitation was Hajin's cold gaze. He profoundly asked what else important she eventually wanted to express. Ji-won slightly suppressed a sigh, hesitantly stating that she also didn't have much time left and had to leave right now. Standing opposite him in the middle of the schoolyard, she confided that she had hesitated a lot before deciding to tell this truth as Eun-ah's best friend. Hajin still maintained a highly mysterious silence, his eyes narrowing as if to pierce through the thoughts hidden behind the other person's serious face. Ji-won then officially revealed the surprising information that lately, Eun-ah seemed to be developing an incredibly close relationship with senior Ji-eun-ah. Her hands slightly tightened with great insecurity, secretly confessing that initially she just thought everything was a misunderstanding, but the reality was much more complicated than that. Ji-won revealed the reason Eun-ah unexpectedly canceled her date with Hajin was actually to secretly go meet senior Ji-eun-ah. She confided that she clearly understood his feelings, but still had to emphasize that Ji-eun-ah was an incredibly special figure. Ji-won continued to cause a shock by affirming that the senior seemed to hold secrets about Hajin's parents that no one knew. Seeing Hajin sullenly turn his back to leave, she panicked and called his name in the hope of prolonging the unfinished conversation. Ji-won firmly stated that ever since becoming close to Ji-eun-ah, Eun-ah had indeed created a vast distance from him. Responding was Hajin's indifferent face. He coldly affirmed that he understood everything and sent a brief thanks to the other person. Ji-won hesitantly admitted that even though she didn't grasp all the details, she still felt like something unsettling was quietly taking place. Her eyes were heavy with sorrow, silently observing every smallest reaction on the face of the man standing opposite her. She then choked up bringing up the past and expressed extreme regret when he abruptly cut off contact right after the incident that year. Ji-won painfully confessed that she was always haunted by the thought that she herself was the reason their relationship fell into ruins. Ji-won was shocked when Hajin's sneer unexpectedly rang out, shattering the melancholic atmosphere surrounding them both. The young lady was astounded, placing a huge question mark on the reason why the man opposite her could let out such an unreasonable laugh right at this moment. Hajin nonchalantly brought his hand up to cover his mouth and dropped an indifferent apology, but his face still couldn't hide the extreme sarcasm. He coldly declared that Ji-won mistakenly thinking he left because of her words only made him find it ridiculous. Hajin's eyes narrowed with sheer contempt as he questioned whether she always thought he had once placed his complete trust in her even more than Eun-ah, a baseless deduction that made his patience completely run out. Ji-won was completely stunned by the direct attack. She asked back in sheer shock as her selfish scheme was exposed. Hajin profoundly affirmed that even though he knew while the other person was intentionally putting on an act, he still chose to remain silent out of respect for Eun-ah's attitude. The city's night scene appeared tranquil, where obvious truths were always present even if people still deliberately and mistakenly thought they could deceive the young lady. The scene concluded with the image of Eun-ah sitting huddled up in loneliness, secretly bitter upon realizing that her long-held desire to share had been treated by others as a foolish joke. Hajin stood with his back turned, coldly reminding the other person to stop while she was still pretending to know absolutely nothing. Eun-ah sat in deep thought with a sharp gaze, seemingly silently calculating just how ruthless she would become if she actually got angry. Hajin walked over to announce that he had requested the troublemakers to gather at the student lounge, receiving a brief thank you from the young lady. He bowed his head deep in thought, then deployed a questioning tactic as he pressed whether they should resolve this incident with a police report or not. Eun-ah narrowed her eyes with deep skepticism, secretly thinking those people had surely prepared dozens of baseless excuses to deny all guilt. She looked at her phone with a pensive face, firmly asserting that instead of choosing retaliation through sheer violence, the young lady flashed a radiant smile and deployed a declarative tactic, emphasizing that she genuinely prioritized the opponent's repentance above all else. Her eyes shone brightly with determination, continuously listing the life lessons and self-reflection that those people would be forced to go through to rebuild their lives. Responding to that excitement was Hajin's anxious gaze. He profoundly asked whether she would mind if she ended up getting hurt once again. In her highly playful chibi form, Eun-ah cheerfully waved her hand to affirm she was completely fine, and boasted that the cut on her palm had almost completely disappeared. Hajin brought his hand to his forehead, looking entirely exhausted, dropping a doubtful remark that she wouldn't be able to handle the retaliation or repentance well, and didn't forget to tell her to inform him if she needed help. Responding to that skepticism was a sharp glare. The young lady then blurted out with great sulkiness as she demanded her senior to stop underestimating her true capabilities. Eun-ah slightly smirked with full confidence, secretly wondering where on earth her fake husband got the confidence to think that someone like her would need help from him. The atmosphere suddenly changed as the sound calling Mi-young's name rang out, shattering the space, marking the appearance of a character possessing a highly haughty look. The group of female students then gathered, chattering excitedly about the fact that Gu-won was with Wamin, and invited each other to buy drinks and head straight toward the student lounge to gossip. The friend tagging along spared no words to praise Mi-young as a genuine social butterfly in the fashion design department because of her incredibly extensive relationships with both seniors and professors. Mi-young chuckled highly smugly, nonchalantly blaming her overly extroverted ENFP personality for making everyone love her so much that it made others jealous. Witnessing their friend's unusually radiant face, the group of female students then deployed an interrogation tactic as they pressed whether she was secretly dating someone. With a flushed face full of satisfaction, Mi-young slightly stroked her hair and vaguely stated that there was actually no romance going on. It was just that something incredibly satisfying had just happened. The scenario closed with astonishment clearly showing on the girls' faces as a highly bewildered exclamation unexpectedly echoed throughout the empty corridor. Eun-ah trudged along with a miserable look, secretly and bitterly confirming that she had indeed been locked inside that dark room. Her messy hair and astounded face made the person behind her incredibly smug, secretly mocking that the prey escaped faster than expected but looked truly unkempt. With sharp eyes filled with malice, she slightly smirked with a ruthless smile upon witnessing her dirty schemes succeed perfectly. She then deployed a triumphant move as she casually carried her shopping bags and walked away, secretly reminding the opponent that she should have just stayed put as a princess instead of foolishly picking a fight with her. With a radiant face and a fake smile, she cheered with great joy to announce her presence in front of the upperclassman senior. Responding to that enthusiasm was Wamin's indifferent look. She nonchalantly thanked her, and then vaguely stated that she also really wanted to see Gu-won again after so many days apart. Mi-young immediately deployed a flattering tactic as she firmly affirmed that as long as the senior spoke up, she would definitely always be there right away, without a bit of hesitation. She suddenly became highly mysterious, gently offering a suggestion that she had an incredibly special friend she wanted to introduce for the senior to get to know. That person was none other than Eun-ah, the young lady sitting with her chin on her hand and sorrowful eyes, seemingly still completely unaware that she had just fallen into the crosshairs of new schemes. The story closed with the young lady's pressure-filled greeting aimed straight at the senior, officially raising the curtain for the highly dramatic upcoming marriage scandal series. Mi-young startled and spun around when unexpectedly pressed by senior Wamin about whether the two of them had ever met each other before. She then used a two-faced expression to fabricate a story that her father used to work at Hanul, so she and Eun-ah had naturally been incredibly close since childhood. Thinking about the blatant lies, Mi-young couldn't help but sweat profusely out of terror, secretly afraid that her dark scheme would soon be exposed. Eun-ah suddenly let out an incredibly carefree laugh to shatter the suffocating atmosphere. She waved her hand and firmly considered that those outdated matters were actually no longer worth worrying about. However, her eyes suddenly flashed with sorrow as she secretly placed a huge question mark on why fate kept letting her get entangled in troubles alongside Wamin. Sitting quietly in distress, The young lady silently asserted that what she hated the most was having to participate in these petty, malicious mind games. On the other side, Mi-young clutched her knees tightly to reassure herself that everything was still fine because Eun-ah would definitely never find out the perpetrator. Her eyes slightly wavered with great insecurity as she admitted that the pressure from Senior Gu-won always brought an invisible weight that made her heart tremble constantly. Seeing Gu-won still indifferently checking his phone, Mi-young secretly hoped he wouldn't meddle in other people's business, because she believed the distance between them would keep her secret safe. The scenario continued with Mi-young's highly fake forced smile as she tried to act obedient to answer the sound of her name being called by the senior. Waman slightly smirked with a highly meaningful smile, gently instructing Mi-young to try her best to take good care of their own. She suddenly became stern, directly questioning whether Mi-young still kept the habit of talking bad behind others' backs like in their freshman year, making the latter only able to stammer in denial out of fear. Mi-young hastily forced a laugh to dispel the suffocating atmosphere, trying to use a two-faced expression to avoid the sensitive topic in order to cover up her true nature in front of her senior. Despite that embarrassment, Waman still profoundly affirmed that the young lady was actually an incredibly kind person and always gave special attention to the underclassmen. Eun-ah slightly looked up with an astounded expression upon hearing Waman continue to launch psychological attacks, revealing that she had just received help from the girl herself recently. She continued to vaguely bring up the story of how the young lady had worked hard to find her lost phone as clear proof of her undeniable kindness. Exclamations of "ah" rang out across the room about the junior's maturity, accompanied by a heavy reminder about the deep connection between the professors and the Hanol group. Feeling that the flatteries were gradually becoming too much, Eun-ah slightly frowned and was about to speak up to stop it when she accidentally knocked over the can of water on the table in her fluster. Right at that moment, an arm unexpectedly reached out with lightning speed, executing a dramatic block to timely prevent the impending accident. Hajin decisively held tightly onto Eun-ah's hand to stabilize her posture. He coldly issued a warning, telling her that she must definitely be more careful in all her actions. Eun-ah exclaimed in panic upon accidentally spilling the water and quickly asked Hajin for permission to go to the restroom to handle the stain. Mi-young immediately used a sharp gaze to observe, and then quickly made an excuse to go to the restroom to secretly follow the young lady. The restroom scene appeared entirely silent with closed doors, signaling a highly dramatic confrontation about to take place. Eun-ah meticulously cleaned the stain under the running tap water, completely unaware that a threat was silently lurking right behind her back. Suddenly, the dry sound of a closing door rang out, shattering the tranquility, causing the young lady's heart to suddenly skip a beat in terror. Mi-young revealed herself with a face of extreme anger, loudly questioning Eun-ah about the true meaning behind those highly offensive words just now. The young lady turned her head in astonishment to look at the other, profoundly asking back what on earth Mi-young was trying to imply. The rage erupted. Mi-young screamed harshly as she pressed why Eun-ah dared to blatantly fabricate the story that she was the one who had found the phone. Still maintaining a calm demeanor while wringing out the towel, Eun-ah firmly asserted that she was only confirming the truth and asked if there was any misunderstanding here. The young lady's eyes suddenly became sharp and full of sarcasm. She secretly wondered to herself if finding an item was truly worth the other person throwing such a massive tantrum. Mi-young was shocked with her face changing color, seemingly gradually realizing that she had just fallen into a verbal trap with no way out. She then profoundly pressed with a face full of skepticism whether Eun-ah was actually wanting to test her limits. Eun-ah decisively stepped forward with a highly proud demeanor, firmly asserting that things were actually not a big deal at all to cause such a furious outburst. She then frowned and questioned whether this upperclassman had truly paid attention to the weighty warnings she had expressed. Standing opposite the enemy, Eun-ah coldly emphasized her family's prestige by affirming that the professors here all had an incredibly deep connection with Hanol. Mi-young slightly smirked with a highly sinister smile, casually noting that misunderstandings often arise because both sides still don't have concrete evidence. She then spoke up sarcastically, asking if Eun-ah intended to ask a professor to teach her a lesson, but was immediately shut down by an ironclad threat from the young lady's grandfather. That was a firm assertion that in this country, anyone making a living in the fashion industry could not escape the influence of the Hanol group. Eun-ah stomped her foot and stepped forward oppressively, silently affirming her dominant position in the tense battle of wits right in the empty restroom. She then delivered the decisive blow by bringing up the fact that the other's father was an editor-in-chief to mock her ridiculous boastfulness, leaving Mi-young totally frozen in extreme humiliation. Eun-ah radiated a highly sharp aura, casually noting that everything had been resolved satisfactorily and she didn't need to get involved any further. She then executed a suppressive move by pinning the opponent against the wall, profoundly questioning whether Mi-young truly thought that evidence was the most important thing at this moment. The young lady continued to launch a psychological attack by coldly threatening that if she chose to misunderstand, the other should try to guess just how ruthlessly she would act. Seeing through the enemy's panic, Eun-ah sarcastically reminded her that when confronting someone who doesn't play fair, she should put all her effort into clearing up any misunderstandings immediately. She then smirked sarcastically as she pressed whether this was just a disastrous misunderstanding or if the other had essentially run out of all excuses for her behavior. With a pressure-filled gaze, Eun-ah firmly asserted that Mi-young should grasp the situation soon and demanded her to quickly humble herself and beg for forgiveness. Ha-jin's sudden appearance turned the tide upside down in an instant, making Mi-young completely freeze in shock as she witnessed him walk past like a stranger. Ha-jin then used a playboy charm as he slightly smiled and pressed whether she had taken the trouble to stand here waiting because she was worried he might get hit. In her highly amusing chibi form, Eun-ah then pulled a sulky move to hide her embarrassment in front of her husband while her face was still flushing red with shame. The confrontation ended when Ha-jin decisively asserted that the one who suffered the loss in the collision just now was actually not her, making the young lady only able to scream out in resentment. Eun-ah decisively clutched the hem of Gu-won's shirt to hold him back, silently and firmly calling her senior's name when she saw him about to actually leave. She then threw a distracting move by loudly questioning how he could accidentally forget the most important thing at this moment. A luxurious white envelope was unexpectedly brought out, radiating the aura of an incredibly valuable item that made everyone curious. Mi-young broke into a triumphant smile, loudly asking whether this was a ticket to the performance being held in South Korea for the first time. Gu-won was stunned as he took the envelope, secretly amazed at the gift carrying the weight of hitting the jackpot that he had just received. The young lady casually explained that thanks to following his social media, she had taken the trouble to prepare an official invitation under his name through his very own management agency. Mi-young then used a flattering tactic by expressing extreme jealousy, but was immediately hit by Eun-ah's psychological move affirming that she would never forget her senior's share. Faced with the two girls' excessive wooing, Gu-won then deployed an incredibly awkward neck-scratching move, silently admitting to himself that he was completely flustered. Back at the apartment, Ha-jin unexpectedly appeared with a tired face, firmly announcing to Eun-ah that he was genuinely not feeling well. The young lady, who was leisurely enjoying a cold popsicle, suddenly froze, her eyes widening in sheer astonishment at her fake husband's sudden health condition. Ha-jin, in his sullen chibi form, observed Eun-ah leisurely sipping her popsicle, creating a highly awkward silence between the two of them. She then tilted her head, displaying an expression full of suspicion as she pressed her fake husband for the reason why he was suddenly behaving so weirdly. Ha-jin suddenly reached out to grab Eun-ah's hand, firmly asserting that he had a fever and forcing her to directly feel his body temperature despite her refusal. He brought a hot hand to his forehead looking completely exhausted, profoundly emphasizing that his body temperature was indeed rising abnormally high. Eun-ah panicked and demanded he let go of her hand, questioning this abrupt action, but secretly admitted in her heart that the other person was genuinely having a health issue. Taking advantage of the dizziness, he then leaned into the young lady's arms, vaguely letting her know that he was feeling extremely dizzy. She then struggled violently and screamed for him to leave quickly, while Ha-jin indifferently complained that his legs no longer had enough strength to stand firm. He then launched a sharp logical counterattack, loudly declaring that since she had hugged him, it was perfectly fair for him to hug her back, leaving the young lady utterly speechless. Eun-ah slightly sighed in concession. She offered a compromise by demanding that he was only allowed to hold onto her tightly for exactly 10 minutes to defuse the situation. The space suddenly became strangely quiet, concluding an evening full of unexpected variables behind the door of their apartment. Hajin gently reached up to stroke his messy hair, looking completely exhausted, profoundly asking whether the young lady had just returned home late at night. Eun-ah stood shrinking by the door with a face full of surprise, loudly questioning why he was still awake and reminding him that she had gone out drinking with Waman. Responding was Hajin's gaze, heavy with sorrow. He inwardly complained that he couldn't feel happy at all when she kept leaving him to wait anxiously. Eun-ah's eyes suddenly became sharp and full of scrutiny. She vaguely stated that she just wanted to ask a small question to prepare for any situation that might arise. Standing opposite her fake husband, the young lady then launched a direct attack, bluntly pressing whether Hajin was actually smoking. In her completely bewildered chibi form, Eun-ah was shocked, asking herself why she was the one being suspected of smoking instead of the other person. She then deployed an inspection move, continuously bringing her nose to smell her own clothes, secretly panicked and not understanding why the strange scent clung so heavily. As if suddenly remembering something, Eun-ah muttered that perhaps the cigarette smell had clung to her from the bar or from the senior she had just been in contact with. Hajin's eyes suddenly narrowed with full suspicion. He profoundly repeated the very strange way she addressed the senior, instead of calling her sister, as she usually did with Waman. The scenario ended with Hajin's sharp gaze aimed straight into the other's core, silently asserting for sure that the mysterious figure was definitely a man. Eun-ah grimaced and pushed Hajin away when he unexpectedly got close to her neck, loudly questioning whether it was the smell of perfume or actually just heavy cigarette smoke clinging to him. The young lady screamed in panic when her fake husband suddenly gripped her hand tightly, secretly worried that the melting popsicle would stain both of their clothes because of this bizarre action. In his highly humorous chibi form, Hajin unexpectedly made a reckless move, casually opening his mouth to take a huge bite of the ice cream despite all his wife's feeble resistance. Eun-ah stood frozen with a dazed face, her eyes wide open in sheer astonishment as she looked at the wooden stick, now only bearing the clean trace of the sweet treat that had just been blatantly stolen. Her fury erupted, making the young lady scream in sheer resentment over losing her last popsicle, while Hajin then used a feigned sickness move hoping she would go easy on him. The scene shifted to the night streets. Eun-ah firmly asserted that she only went out to help the sick guy deal with the recycling pile, and not because she was a glutton. Responding to that highly forced justification was Hajin's indifferent face. He casually dropped a highly sarcastic agreement to tease the young lady. Under the dim streetlights, Hajin slowly carried the heavy bag, walking next to Eun-ah, silently accepting the reality of being spun around like a pinwheel by her. The young lady still couldn't stop complaining with deep regret, firmly reprimanding the person opposite her on why he dared to steal the precious popsicle she had taken the trouble to save. The story temporarily concluded with Eun-ah's skepticism about his miraculous recovery speed, completely unaware that Hajin had just used a hairdryer to create a fake fever to deceive her. Hajin pressed on why Eun-ah wore her hat so tightly pulled down in the hot weather, silently warning that if she got recognized, the news would explode on social media immediately. Eun-ah loudly reminded her fake husband not to forget his status as a top influencer, while Hajin could only indifferently click his tongue, yielding to her wishes. The young lady suddenly stopped with a face full of anxiety, secretly feeling an invisible wave of pressure as if someone was silently observing her from afar. She cast her eyes around with full vigilance, her wavering eyes harboring extreme insecurity as her premonition of a danger was gradually becoming clearly visible. Hajin profoundly stopped walking and turned his head to press. What on earth was happening to turn her mind upside down in the middle of the empty street? Eun-ah vaguely shared her feeling of being stalked every time they returned home lately, making the surrounding atmosphere suddenly become incredibly suffocating. She gave a slight forced smile to dispel her worry, silently telling herself that she was probably just being overly sensitive after the recent series of incidents. Eun-ah decisively pulled her hat brim lower to hide her pale face, simultaneously urging Hajin to leave here quickly to ensure their safety. Responding was Hajin's sharp gaze filled with danger. He silently asserted for sure that he had discovered the traces of the person hiding in the darkness. A firm hand unexpectedly reached out to grip Eun-ah's hand tightly, closing out the panic with a silent, yet incredibly steadfast protective action. Hajin unexpectedly reached out to grab Eun-ah's fingers, making the young lady completely stunned by this sudden intimate contact. He then used force to tightly squeeze her small hand, as if wanting to send a silent, yet incredibly steadfast reassurance amidst the night street. Eun-ah stood frozen with a flushed face. She was still engrossed in sipping her ice cream, but her eyes were already full of astonishment at her husband's action. The young lady then questioningly pressed why he only dared to hold her fingers, only to receive the explanation that he was afraid she would suddenly throw a huge tantrum. Faced with the question about her current feelings, Eun-ah hastily avoided his gaze and shyly complained about the sweltering weather to cover up her embarrassment. The setting suddenly shifted to the luxurious building lobby, where the green sprouts of the ornamental plants quietly witnessed the highly awkward silence of the young couple. Stepping to the reception desk, the two still tried to maintain the most natural demeanor in order to protect the secret of their contract marriage that was being stalked. The building staff then flashed a radiant smile, loudly calling the name Ju Hajin to announce that an important package had just been delivered. Eun-ah's eyes suddenly became tense. She secretly feared she would be unlucky enough to run into the senior right in this lobby waiting area. The young lady decisively stepped inside and didn't forget to remind her fake husband to quickly put the ice cream in the fridge, leaving Hajin only able to resentfully assert that he wasn't that foolish. The receptionist pushed the envelope forward, gently asking Hajin to sign for confirmation so he could officially receive the package. Hajin took the envelope with a highly skeptical expression, firmly questioning the staff whether this was the item that had just been sent via express delivery. He silently observed the white envelope in his hand, secretly raising doubts in his heart about the mysterious contents hidden inside. Hajin's hands suddenly tightened around the corner of the envelope, creating wrinkles as if he were trying to suppress a surging wave of psychological pressure. His eyes narrowed dangerously, silently calculating whether the identity of the sender was somehow related to his recent troubles. Not missing a single detail, he turned to press the receptionist about the exact time this package was delivered to the building. Upon receiving the answer that the item had just arrived 10 minutes ago, Hajin froze with a sharp gaze aimed straight into the empty void. He walked away slowly with a back full of heavy thoughts, casually repeating his warning that he had already said many times not to bother him. Pressing the phone to his ear while wiping the sweat from his forehead with a towel, Hajin coldly ordered the person on the other end to never contact him this way again. With a tone full of contempt, he reminded that person to use their brain to remember that every dime he paid came with absolute obedience. Hajin coldly affirmed over the phone that this was the price to pay to stop Eun-ah from finding out the truth that had been hidden for so long. Meanwhile, in the empty classroom, a highly straightforward conversation was about to break out to expose the newly arisen suspicions. Eun-ah smirked slightly with a sharp smile, confidently stating that the Gu one she used to know would never voluntarily get himself involved in these troublesome messes. She then leaned in close with a mischievous look, deeply pressing him on whether she was about to witness him officially entering a relationship. Gu one rubbed his forehead, looking completely exhausted, coldly demanding the young lady to stop at once because he was genuinely feeling too tired. Not bothering to care, Eun-ah casually admitted that she perfectly understood the other girl was beautiful, wealthy, and possessed a not at all bad personality. Her eyes suddenly turned deep and probing, secretly preparing to deliver the most important assessment regarding the true nature of that target. Answering that attack was Gu Won's sharp gaze, as he profoundly asked back whether that person was truly as fragile as she appeared on the outside. His hands lightly gripped the envelope, secretly marveling at how that girl always tried hard to hide her weakness, but ultimately still accidentally exposed a flaw. Ending with the supermodel's highly philosophical observation, firmly asserting that the very fragility of a seemingly perfect person is what attracts others the most. Eun-ah turned her head back with a meaningful smile, silently asserting that the only thing more dangerous than love is pity. Gu Won glided through the crowd with a profound expression, telling himself that once he unfortunately took pity on someone like her, he would soon sink deep with no way out. The young lady then gave the other person a reminding look, firmly demanding him to know how to take care of himself against the surrounding temptations. Her eyes shone with immense pride, secretly gloating as she felt her own prestige gradually controlling every thought of the person opposite her. In her mischievous chibi form, Eun-ah was gleefully excited to be strutting through the bustling and glamorous high society party. Goo-won stood quietly in a corner with a rugged look, profoundly scanning the luxurious scene as if searching for a hidden truth. In the middle of the magnificent banquet hall, an inquiry rang out about losing each other amidst the VIP crowd, receiving an indifferent, yet highly satisfying reply. The young couple in their chibi forms then enthusiastically discussed the fashion brand's bold transition in daring to shed traditional classic values. Responding to that excitement was the supermodel's pensive face, as he secretly highly appreciated the promising new direction of this collection. Eun-ah suddenly became serious. She narrowed her eyes probingly and firmly questioned whether the person across from her was actually wearing cologne. Eun-ah forced a smug smile, secretly wondering why everyone possessed a sense of smell as sharp as a hound's, instantly recognizing the scent that Hajin had intentionally sprayed on her this morning. Faced with the pressure-filled silence, the young lady could only quietly observe Goo-won's profound silhouette gradually creating a vast distance in magnificent banquet hall. Eun-ah hastily reached up to stroke her hair to hide her embarrassment, firmly asserting that things were actually not what her senior mistakenly thought. But Goo-won maintained a cold expression, profoundly remarking that this strong man's cologne genuinely made him feel completely disgusted. The young lady then raised her hand to smell her clothes to confirm the truth, while the supermodel secretly affirmed this was definitely the scent from her ex-boyfriend. The suffocating atmosphere was suddenly shattered by the sound of Eun-ah's name echoing across the room, making her startle and turn around with an utterly astounded look. The young lady cheered with great joy upon recognizing the presence of her old teacher, loudly greeting her after a long time of not seeing each other by the luxurious banquet table. The woman then expressed her sincere gratitude for the precious show tickets, while simultaneously directing a curious gaze toward the young man standing next to Eun-ah to press for his identity. Faced with the highly sensitive question of whether Goo-won was her boyfriend or not, Eun-ah suddenly froze with a stunned expression, making the surrounding atmosphere become incredibly tense. In her hilarious chibi form, Eun-ah hastily waved her hands to deny any romantic relationship and introduced him as a famous supermodel and upperclassman, closing the misunderstanding with Goo-won's polite greeting. Waman slightly narrowed her eyes in deep thought, secretly making sharp assessments upon unexpectedly spotting a highly promising face right in the middle of the banquet hall. She then loudly praised Goo-won's impressive physique and affirmed that any designer would crave to collaborate with him. In her proud chibi form, Eun-ah secretly gloated upon witnessing the handshake confirming a highly potential collaboration between Goo-won and her senior. The woman then voiced her amazement at the full gathering of Hanul group members at today's high society party. The young lady took a small sip of wine and clearly showed her surprise upon hearing Ju Jian mentioned, firmly asking where her cousin was currently located. Responding was the opposite person's mysterious smile along with the shocking revelation that it was Ju Jiang who had brought a special figure to attend. Suddenly, the decisive sound of high heels echoed on the stone floor, signaling the impending appearance of a figure holding absolute authority. The vice chairwoman of Hanul Group officially emerged with a cold demeanor, making the surrounding atmosphere suddenly become incredibly pressured. Facing the uninvited appearance of her rival, Eun-ah maintained an emotionless face in her chibi form to silently observe every movement. The young lady completely froze with a dazed face, silently exclaiming in astonishment upon realizing that new variables were gradually turning the whole party upside down. A resounding call echoed along with a powerful foot stomp from the man, making the party's atmosphere suddenly become tense. Eun-ah's high heels hastily glided across the floor as if trying to run away from the continuous urging to stop echoing from behind. Goo-won shockingly blocked her path and firmly questioned where on earth she was planning to suddenly run off to in the middle of such a critical moment. In her panicking chibi form, Eun-ah tearfully confessed that she genuinely wanted to escape from this suffocating reunion. The supermodel then cast a suspicion, narrowing his eyes to press for the true identity of the vice chairwoman who just appeared and the shady connection between them. Responding was Eun-ah's sharp gaze full of heavy thoughts, as she remained profoundly silent, as if trying to suppress a shocking secret about her own family. The young lady then used stern words to affirm that it was the root cause of all family tragedies, which was a common occurrence in the upper class. Faced with that bitterness, Goo-won went silent with a sorrowful, pensive face to empathize with the loneliness she had endured for so long. Looking at the powerful woman smiling socially, Eun-ah threw out a sarcastic remark about a familial relationship that was even worse than strangers. A sharp gaze suddenly narrowed with deep calculation, signaling that the real turbulence for the young lady was only officially beginning now. Gu-won narrowed his eyes calculatingly, silently observing the opponent's every move like a hunter patiently waiting for the prey to fall into the trap. In her panicked chibi form, Eun-ah whimpered upon realizing she had no safe loophole left to hide amidst the crowded place. She shockingly exclaimed upon seeing the enemy looming toward her, silently commanding her legs to quickly find a way to escape immediately. A hand suddenly reached out to grab Eun-ah's slender waist, executing a dramatic pull to draw her into his arms amidst everyone's sheer astonishment. Amazed cheers rang out, breaking the suffocating atmosphere upon witnessing the couple's highly bold interaction right at the party. The vice-chairwoman of the conglomerate appeared with peak charisma, her deep eyes piercing into the void as if searching for a buried truth. Gu-won quietly turned his back and walked away with a nonchalant demeanor, silently affirming to himself that he would not let anyone harm the girl he wanted to protect. The supermodel then stared silently straight ahead, his eyes clearly showing determination as he prepared to open fire for a shocking counterattack. Sensing something unusual, the powerful woman turned her head in shock, loudly questioning the identity of the person secretly observing her from behind. The luxurious swimming pool scene appeared. Eun-ah softly expressed her thanks, but still couldn't hide her anxiety as she pressed on whether them sneaking into this place was actually legal or not. Gu-won brought Eun-ah to the quiet pool area, casually letting her know he used to film here, and it was quite lucky this place was closed. Sitting down with a melancholic face, Eun-ah let out an exhausted sigh, having thought she had ended the days of running away from her own biological aunt. The supermodel slightly narrowed his eyes in surprise, profoundly noting that the young lady fundamentally did not seem like the type to choose to evade like this. Staring blankly at her white high heels, Eun-ah bitterly admitted that if one couldn't win an unequal battle, running away was the only solution. She firmly asserted that even though her grandfather held supreme power, her aunt had secretly built an overly solid empire in the industry. Eun-ah's eyes were heavy with sorrow as she confided that the fear from her childhood still clung to her, leaving her without enough courage to confront directly. Suddenly the young lady broke into a smile full of determination, proudly declaring that she would definitely achieve brilliant success, so her enemies couldn't touch her. Eun-ah then deployed the tiger hiding its claws tactic, affirming with bright eyes that she was secretly waiting for the right moment to rise up strongly. Smirking slightly with a highly sarcastic smile, the supermodel muttered under his breath that pity is the most ridiculous thing for someone like her. Eun-ah shockingly spun around with stunned eyes, blurting out a bewildered question upon just hearing an incredibly strange sentence from the other person. Gu-won looked deeply into the water, casually pointing out that the fact Eun-ah could grow up kind-hearted in such a highly calculating Chaebol family was simply unimaginable. He slightly tilted his head to observe her expression, firmly praising that the young lady was truly an incredibly extraordinary and amazing person in his eyes. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the appearance of a mysterious figure stealthily hiding behind a pillar, maliciously observing their every action from afar. This entire private scene was suddenly captured entirely in the frame of a camera in recording mode, signaling a despicable stalking plot preparing to launch a fatal scandal attack. The modern apartment space suddenly echoed with Eun-ah's frustrated screams as she firmly asserted to the person on the other end of the line that things were absolutely not like that. The young lady held the phone to her ear with a clearly anxious expression, gently emphasizing that her grandfather shouldn't be too strict because his granddaughter was inherently a highly responsible person. As soon as the call with her grandfather ended, Eun-ah let out an annoyed sigh and, silently horrified, wondered how those sensational articles could have been published. A shocking piece of news suddenly exploded on social media, with a headline claiming that the third-generation heir of the Hanul group was secretly dating a renowned supermodel. The article continued to release evidence of a private meeting between the senior and junior at school, even though the family had decisively rejected these baseless rumors. In a furiously angry chibi form, Eun-ah constantly scratched her head and pulled her hair, screaming and questioning why the paparazzi could relentlessly tail them all the way to the pool area. The young lady thoughtfully crossed her arms, silently feeling guilty upon realizing that Senior Gu-won had been accidentally dragged into this troublesome scandal vortex because of her. Suddenly Eun-ah's eyes wavered with insecurity, stealing a hesitant glance to the side as she sensed another unspeakable truth gradually manifesting. Hajin abruptly appeared at the room's entrance with a cold demeanor, making Eun-ah silently confess that she was feeling extremely flustered by his oppressive presence. The scene closed with Hajin's dangerously sharp gaze. It seemed he was using his deep eyes to pin down all the young lady's shady actions in the dark. Hajin casually asked if Eun-ah's conversation with her grandfather about the recent scandal went smoothly. The young lady then flashed a radiant smile and waved her hands, boldly asserting that she had clearly explained everything as just a disastrous misunderstanding. Hajin merely gave a nonchalant nod, praising her for doing a good job while his eyes remained carelessly fixed on his phone screen. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to care as much as she thought, Eun-ah curiously asked the reason why he had taken the effort to groom his hair so meticulously today. In a mischievous chibi form, she vaguely commented that this hairstyle actually just made her fake husband look significantly older than usual. Unexpectedly, Hajin smirked with a meaningful smile, deeply teasing that wasn't she always prioritizing older men anyway. The spot-on remark made Eun-ah completely freeze with a dazed face, silently realizing that this man was actually paying close attention to the dating rumor. Without giving her time to react, Hajin reached out to grab his wife's shoulder and boldly declared that since the main character of the scandal was at school anyway, the decisive action made Eun-ah blush out of embarrassment. She could only stare blankly at his resolute back as he ordered both of them to head out immediately. Hajin closed the astonishment with a fiercely sharp gaze, boldly affirming that their next destination was the very school where all the trouble began. The Hankook University campus suddenly became more bustling than ever as everywhere Eun-ah went, she caught the curious gazes and whispering gossip of the student crowds. In an exhausted chibi form, the young lady could only quietly endure everyone's scrutiny with a sluggish face, as if she had just gone through a nightmare. She then began to complain, silently thinking that the whole school seemed to have spent the entire day just gossiping about her shocking scandal. Seeing Eun-ah drowning in despair, her close group of friends stepped forward to comfort her, anxiously predicting that, even with a correction, these troubles would still haunt them for a whole month. Contrary to her panic, Senior Gu-won casually put on a careless face and boldly asserted that his management agency was actually quite thrilled about this rumor. Ji-won slightly narrowed her eyes in suspicion, silently placing a big question mark on the authenticity of those articles, not understanding how the paparazzi could capture those private moments. The accompanying female friend flashed a meaningful smile and started interrogating, vaguely pressing to ask if the two of them had actually been sneaking around together. Gu-won maintained a cold, silent demeanor, his eyes narrowing deeply as if to pin the crowd's baseless speculations into nothingness. The supermodel then dropped an indifferent explanation, boldly asserting that everything that happened was actually just due to an incredibly unlucky timing coincidence. The scene closed with Eun-ah's insecure sigh. It seemed the young lady was feeling an invisible pressure even more terrifying than the rumors out there. Eun-ah silently recalled Ju Hajin's triumphant face this morning and deduced that her fake husband seemed to be bizarrely excited. Her best friend then showed concern by turning towards Gu-won and commenting that the senior probably couldn't focus at all on today's class. She then smirked confidently, boldly asserting that although she couldn't completely erase the rumor, she still had a way to make it quiet down faster. In a bewildered chibi form, Eun-ah sprang up in shock, pressing to ask what exactly this top-secret plan her friend was harboring was. The upperclassman profoundly explained that public opinion often depends on who you are close to and suggested that Eun-ah should change her target to create a diversion. The young lady awkwardly made excuses as she shyly confessed that she was inherently a loner but extremely approachable. Her friend Sleon then narrowed her eyes scrutinizingly, boldly reminding her that when it came to a blabbermouth to spread the news, Eun-ah definitely already had a candidate. Kim Ji-dong suddenly appeared with a face flushed from embarrassment, deeply questioning the truth to see if she and that supermodel were really not dating. Eun-ah immediately flashed a radiant smile and offered reassurance, boldly asserting that she was absolutely not the type of person to get involved in a campus romance. The scene closed with a shy chibi Ji-dong clearing his throat, boldly accepting the position of best friend so he could rightfully stay by the young lady's side. Eun-ah, in a chibi form, narrowed her eyes in suspicion as she questioned Senior Sleon about the validity of this plan, while silently thinking that the other party was truly incredibly annoying. She turned to question Gu-won about the absurdity of them sitting right next to each other, despite their initial goal being to extinguish the rumors. Soyeon immediately provoked them by reminding that the photos had already been taken anyway, so instead of being timid, the two of them should act even bolder. The clinking sound of a spoon tapping against a beer glass shattered the bustling atmosphere, officially drawing the attention of the entire student group present at the bar. Soyeon stood up boldly and declared that Eun-ah organized this party because she wanted to get to know everyone, while not forgetting to drop a reminder not to get too heavily drunk. The young girl quietly drained her beer glass with a sluggish face, silently lamenting that having to force herself to socialize among the crowd was actually an energy-draining torture. Amidst the noisy space, an accidental slight touch between the fabric of Gu-won's shirt and the bare skin of Eun-ah's arm suddenly created a strange electric spark. The unintentional intimate contact startled Eun-ah with eyes wide open in astonishment. It seemed her heart just skipped a beat out of being overly self-conscious about the other person. Gu-won casually looked at her and boldly suggested they should split the bill fairly, leaving Eun-ah simply staring blankly in astonishment. The scene closed with Eun-ah's sorrowful expression as she vaguely confessed that the reason she went out of her way to set this up was partly due to pressure from her aunt. Gu-won nonchalantly admitted that although this wasn't Eun-ah's fault, this overly close presence still made him feel incredibly uncomfortable. Responding to that coldness was Eun-ah's sulking face in her chibi form as she offered a compromise, decisively proposing that she would pay for half of the bill herself. Suddenly, a student stirred up the atmosphere by mixing a to-the-brim glass of somek, despite Eun-ah helplessly trying to wave her hands in refusal. Eun-ah's face suddenly became anxious as she silently confessed that she inherently wasn't good at dealing with strong alcohol levels like everyone mistakenly thought. Amidst the noisy space, Gu-won's eyes suddenly narrowed profoundly. It seemed he was using his sharp gaze to pin down some mysterious intention into reality. Not letting her suffer, the senior suddenly reached out and blocked the alcohol glass, causing Eun-ah to gasp out a bewildered cry at this protective action. Kim Ji-dong in his chibi form immediately threw a teasing jab, reminding them that Gu-won taking the drink for her right now would only make the dating rumor flare up even more fiercely. Her exploding fury caused Eun-ah to radiate a chilling murderous aura. She silently wondered if smashing the glass into this blabbermouth friend's head would help bury the scandal instantly. Gu-won indifferently announced he was going outside for a smoke, leaving chibi Eun-ah to just cry out in despair as she saw that even her close upper-class woman was intending to abandon her. The scene closed with Soyeon's serious, calculating face as she focused on observing her phone screen. It seemed another shocking truth was about to be exposed. Soyeon held her phone with a calculating gaze, casually dropping a greeting to welcome the unexpected appearance of an uninvited guest. Eun-ah completely froze with a dazed face, shocked to recognize the familiar silhouette of Hajin looming right amidst the crowd of classmates. Feeling the atmosphere gradually becoming suffocating, the young girl silently made up her mind to drain this glass of beer to escape the ironic reality. However, a strong arm unexpectedly reached out and intercepted, decisively snatching the glass just as Eun-ah was about to bring it to her lips. She gasped in horror at the abrupt action, her eyes wide open in astonishment looking at the fake husband who had just intervened so roughly. Ji-dong then put on a furious face, boldly questioning who on earth that stranger was to dare cause a scene at their party table. The response to that provocation was merely the dry thud of a glass slamming down on the table, signaling a dramatic confrontation about to break out. Senior Gu-won slightly furrowed his brows with a mocking look, profoundly reminding Ji-dong of an old debt that the latter seemingly didn't remember in the slightest. Hajin slightly smirked with a dark smile, profoundly issuing a challenge as he pressed to ask if everyone could now see through the truth. The scenario ended with Hajin's powerful shielding action as he boldly affirmed that he was the Black Knight who would protect Eun-ah to the very end.